Okay, I guess we're going to get started. I want to welcome everybody to our Community Cotton Crosshairs Town Hall, presented by the Civil Abuse Mind Project and the Mateo Community Center. Plant is one of the local community-based nonprofits struggling to keep our office open, so any donations would be appreciated. And the Mateo Community Center is also struggling to keep their doors open, so any donations to them would also help. I'm Bonnie Blackberry, president of the Civil Abuse Mind Project, and I'm going to be helping to facilitate with our secretary, Jill Blair, and I want to welcome our guests, Sheriff Bill Alfonso, and Planning and Building and Code Enforcement, John Ford, and our Second District Supervisor, Estelle. After the board speaks, I'll be asking some more questions, and then we'll have this mic here for people to come up and ask questions or voice your concerns. And we have cards over here if someone doesn't feel comfortable coming up here. No, I urge people to do that. And if we looks like we're getting close on chairs, there's some more over there. Okay, so I'm going to start off and turn it over to Jim.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for attending the town hall meeting. My name is Joan Poor. I'm a board member. I live in Blue Slide Creek watershed for 25 years, which is outside of Iceland. And I was born and raised in Humboldt County. And I have a story that I wanted to just express. In 1982 through 85, I attended Bryceland High School. In Bryceland. It was an extension of Beginnings, existing home of Children's House, the preschool, and Skyfish, the elementary school. These were the days of campaign against marijuana planting camp, in full swing. Loud helicopters with nets would fly over our school, disrupting our classes, creating fear. As today, we still have those feelings. Remind you we were children and teens experiencing such behavior. On Monday, July 8, 2019, 11 a.m., I was back in my car for an annual family camping trip. I was in my studio when I heard a loud helicopter, I assumed it was, and first thought, fire. Or maybe the Coast Guard passing through. I ran outside on the deck, spotting a dark-colored helicopter circling my neighbor's cattle ranch. Then it stalls in the air, hovering. It continues to circle the backside of the bridge. I hear it getting louder. I run down to the car for a better view, but can't see it. When I spot it, it's above me. It's so loud, my dogs take cover under my studio and my poultry under their coops. It makes a turn around the curtilage and then heads towards our permanent licensed cultivation site, the Encore Santa Creek. You can tell I'm shaking. That's how I felt when that experience took place. So not sure what that was all about, but later I find out the National Guard, that they were in the area, and so what I really am here to express is I wish to please stop this unnecessary, loud air traffic noise due to helicopters over homesteads. And on a positive note, I want to just address the new Planning and Building Department office here in Redwood. It's on Redwood Drive, and it's open Monday through Wednesday, Monday and Wednesday, 9:30 to 3:30. This has been a much-needed service to Southern Humboldt. I hope the public is aware that it's available and use it. Thank you for making this happen.
Hey, Jared. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jared Rossman, and I'm also on the board of civil remodeling project, as I was back in 1986, when we wound up going to court to bring the county in line through an injunction and a consent decree in federal court from Judge Aguilar. I have in my hand the consent decree that was signed that day that mandated what the county and the state could and could not do to the citizens of this county. And it's very detailed. I'm obviously not going to go into detail now, but it talks about what can be done by officers on the ground, what can be done by aircraft in the air, and what kind of record keeping and admonitions have to be done to and by any troops involved in these kind of efforts. And I'd just like to read one section here. All residents of the state of California who have been subjected in the following activities by defendants in connection with, at that time, the CAMP program, with the campaign against marijuana planting. Random and general high-altitude surveillance by airplanes and satellites. Random and general low-level surveillance by airplanes and helicopters. Dangerous helicopter activities, including harassment and detentions. On-the-ground eradication activities, including warrantless entries, searches of homes and curtilages, warrantless seizures, roadblocks, detentions, interrogations, excessive show of force, and searches by general search warrants. This was 32 years ago, folks. We thought we had put this in the back, in the rearview mirror, and now we're having to do it again. It would be really wonderful if today the sheriff, the supervisor, the code enforcement director could pledge that these kind of things are going to stop henceforward. We don't have to want to go to court again and force us, the community, and the county, which sorely needs the funds to spend oodles of dollars trying to defend themselves against clearly indefensible pursuits. This has explicit directions for what can happen on the ground. What can happen with helicopters in the air? Notwithstanding other things, except over open fields, helicopters shall maintain an altitude of at least 500 feet. Okay? All helicopters have to have identifying, helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft have to have identifiable, clearly identifiable markings and numbers, none of which can be covered, defaced, or otherwise obscured. Any troops on the ground have to be given, before each raid begins, all helicopter pilots have to be orally briefed about the pertinent provisions of this decree, the approved flight plan that they must take to best comply with the decree, the altitudes to be maintained along these flight paths, the location of all known structures and population centers along the flight paths using maps and photographs that are available. It's very detailed. It's very detailed. I'm happy to show any process anybody else sitting here and after me too. I'd just like to ask the sheriff one question, and correct me if I'm wrong. I understand that from satellites you have really good pictures of all the greenhouses and pretty much every plant that's out there. Is that right?
Not necessarily every plant, but we do have some pretty good images. Anyone go on Google Earth and see pretty much all.
Yeah, I could see everyone online, right. Every plant, and we don't have as good, I'm sure, resolution as they give you guys. Okay, I also understand that you can't get a search warrant based on just the satellite imagery, right?
That's correct.
You have to have a person looking.
That's correct. Okay.
But at the start of a week, when you're thinking you're going to go out and do 3 or 4 places, is there any problem with just sending a fixed wing airplane at a couple thousand feet to fly just one flight over the prospective sites to verify, yes, what we saw from the satellite is still there, and we can get a warrant based on that if you need to, rather than sending in helicopters with armed, fatigued troops flying around and around and around over schools, over health centers, over individual houses, disrupting people's lives, scaring their animals. Is there any reason you can't do it that way?
Well, I just want to correct one thing. and there are not armed troops up there flying. So these helicopters are National Guard, and we'd have one fly, and the only persons that were armed in that helicopter were my deputy sheriffs. And so the helicopter is the easiest way to do aerial surveillance. Everything you talked about, Jared, in that consent decree, I agree with. I absolutely agree with. We can't do random aerial searches. That's not what we're doing. It's not what we're doing at all. We're not going to do warrantless searches. We're not going to have troops on the ground storming places without warrants. That's not what we do. What we're going to do is do business as usual here in Humboldt County when it comes to marijuana eradication. And that has to do with the sheriff's office being the lead. The sheriff's office and the deputy sheriffs authoring the search warrants. And there are times when we do call in other resources from Mendocino County, from Trinity County, from Fish and Wildlife, from CAL FIRE. And we utilize those resources, including the National Guard. And we've used the National Guard over the last 10 to 20 years. Now, going back to the 80s, and the camp days being led by the federal government, state resources, I can't take back all the mistakes that people made back then, and all the PTSD, that occurred. Because I feel, when you talk about today, I feel the stress and the pressure and all that coming back when you hear about that. I can definitely feel that from you and from people in this room and from the calls that I've received. That's not what we're going back to. That's not what this is about at all. And so I just want to reaffirm with you, Jared, that everything in there, and you give me a copy of that to see if there's anything outside of what you just said that we're doing. I don't believe there is.
This is not business as usual.
Okay.
Helicopters going around and around. And it seems like I only get the media reports. It seems like you folks don't hit more than a couple places a week. So what's wrong with on Monday you send a fixed wing airplane? You got 4 places to go to this week, folks.
Right.
You fly here, zip, look at that place. You fly here, zip, look at that place from a decent altitude. You fly here, look at that place, and then go home. Why the helicopters circling around and around and around at low altitudes?
Okay, it's a good question. Let me tell you why it's important as far as using federal resources that we're doing. One is it pinpoints. It pinpoints exactly where the egregious grows that we're looking at with GPS pinpoint accuracy. So we're going to a place and we're going to go exactly where that place is. Now, a fixed wing, we can get in the general area. We can look down, and you can't, if anyone's been in a fixed wing aircraft, unless you have bubbles on the side of it, like sometimes CAL FIRE does, or Fish and Wildlife, you can't see what's below. And so you can go to a position where you think is the right GPS area, but unless you have some specific instruments that the National Guard has, we're not going to pinpoint those locations. And as we are going and looking at these, we can verify the fact that is the cannabis cultivation site that is unpermitted. That's a cannabis cultivation site that we want to visit next week, and we can put into a search warrant that we log the GPS location, and so there's no errors. Because in the past, when we've used fixed aircraft, it's been difficult to try and match up the photography with the Google Earth, with GPS, because we're snapping an image or a GPS location as we're flying by, and we may be a couple miles to the east-west of the location. We're looking down, because that's where you can see from a fixed wing aircraft. You can look down, you can say, okay, I think that's on the side of the hill. I'm going to log this GPS location and figure out where that grove site is. And so
I just wanted to say about your jurisdiction. At least several people have called the sheriff's office during the last weeks and asked about the helicopter, and the National Guard helicopter, and they were told, oh, that's not our jurisdiction. But anytime you invite the state or the federal troops in with their helicopters, if it's your jurisdiction, then you should make sure that you accept that and cop to it, okay? Thanks a lot. I'll let other people talk.
Okay, and to talk about that, Jared, too, is we're not going to let people know when we're flying, whether it's Coast Guard. We've used Coast Guard in the past, where we've used the National Guard, or we've rented our own private helicopter. We're not going to tell people when we're going to fly, because again, for the people that are out of compliance with the state law, they may try and cover up some of the things that they're doing. And so so we're not doing that. Again, we're complaint driven. We're going from one location to another, very strategic. But in the meantime, when we're going from one location to another, if we see a potential person, doing environmental violations, growing cannabis, putting a straw in one of the creeks, we're going to identify that and we're going to verify. And if it's a permitted grow, we're just going to turn that information over to the code enforcement. If it's a non-permitted grow, we're going to follow up on it because those are people that are damaging the environment. Those are people that are not, in compliance with the state law. And those are people that we want to go after. But those, again, we're not doing random targets. We don't fly just for the sake of flying. We get complaints every day from our tip line, and we want to follow up on those. And we're thinking we're doing our due diligence by doing that and holding people accountable. But I appreciate you talking, Jared. Thank you.
Clarifying thing, do you have to be at 500 feet? Could you do the same thing at 1,000 or 1,500 feet in the helicopter?
It's a good question, Bonnie. Yes, there's times when we don't have to be at 500 feet, and that's something that I'm going over with my guys. And if we can do aerial surveillance at 1,000, at 2,500 feet, at 10,000 feet, we're going to do that. Now, National Guard has more sophisticated planes out there. It does have fixed wing, Jared. They have fixed wing aircraft that can fly higher and that can pinpoint. And so we will utilize that in the future as well. And so we won't, be buzzing, with helicopters and maintaining a flight. That's going to be something in the future, and we will utilize that.
Hi, my name's Iona Breaker, and I really appreciate you guys coming out today. I'm a new member of the Clint Board. I appreciate my community members coming out as well. Hopefully we can have some constructive conversations and try and really get you guys to understand how we as a community are feeling, and we're not trying to attack, just get a sense of security and just know that we have the community, but we do appreciate you coming and listening and hopefully giving us some clarification. I was born here in Southern Humboldt on Barley Hill in 1986. Looking out at the faces here, I know them from birth. This is my home, this is my community, and I now have a permanent farm where I was married, where I was born, where my nieces and nephews were born, and I have my state, I have my county as well, and I'm trying to do everything right. And on July 8th at 10 in the morning, I was working in my garden, and a very low flying, I know that it seems lower when you're on the ground, but I don't believe it was 500 foot, Black Hawk came over, and so the first thing I did was I called the Sheriff's Department, the substation here in Garberville. The woman was very friendly, but she said that I'm the first person to tell her this, and that she had no idea what was going on, that it wasn't the sheriff that was doing it. My next call was to the county, to the planning department, and they put me through to code enforcement, who said it's out of their jurisdiction. I told them I have my permits in my hands, I'm holding them up to them so it looks like they're gonna land on our field there, and they said, we don't really recommend doing that because it's not our jurisdiction. So I called the state, who I'm also licensed with, and it put me through to a phone number that says we don't have a voicemail set up. And the whole time I'm sitting there panicking because we're doing everything right. And then I noticed that they're not actually going over my farm as much as my mother's house, and she has no illegal activity. She does not grow, she's a local business owner here in town. And she's lived on the same property for going on 40 years, and she has nothing going on, and they went 3 really long, slow circles over her house that were looking like they were going to land and go up to her house. My animals are freaking out. If you come up, her plants are still pushed down, so I know it's 500 feet is what you say, but I'm not exaggerating. These plants bent over, and it really panicked. I mean, yeah, it was the end of the camp era, but I was still here and I was still present with these same people in our community. And these people that you see here today, they all have concerns, they all have questions, but none of them are what you said, these big egregious trespass roads. Nobody here is out there trying to tear apart the landscape. They're just all here trying to survive and be part of the community. And so it freaks me out. And then just to hear you say that it's complaint driven and that it's pinpointed with GPS. Well, 1 week later on the 15th of July, here comes that same Black Hawk again to my mom's property and over our farm again. And I can say that Barley Hill, we are a small community. Mostly it's first and second generations living together, and there's not that many people. And the people that are up there that have commercial cannabis going on, we all have our permits. We're all doing the right steps. And it's a little concerning to hear that, you guys are working on it and it's just going after these egregious ones, and I have my permits are in my hands, but it's, I just want some clarification because I know that none of the neighbors are calling each other because we all know that we have permits. We have our community watch, our road watch, and just want to make sure that our community is here and stands strong. So thank you for your time and thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks, Iona, right? Okay, I do want to say that when we do fly with the Coast Guard or helicopters in general, we're not looking at landing anywhere. So that's, I know that is something that we, unless there's an emergency, unless there's rescue operations, those kind of things, it's not, the purpose of flying a helicopter is to just do aerial surveillance. It's not to do insertion, it's not to do aerial operations, where we're dropping people in, unless it has to do with trespass grow on public land. And there's times when we have to do that because there's no roads in those areas. So that's on public land or deep into the private land and some of the redwood forests owned by large timber companies, those kind of things. So that's what we've done in the past, and we don't plan on ever doing helicopter insertions unless it has to do with rescue operations.
I appreciate you saying that, and that is clarification to me, because from my experience in the past, we have, like I said, a perfect
Yes.
meadow, so we've had them land for 6 plants of a neighbor's and be there for hours, and we don't know this. When I call the sheriff and I say it's not our deal, I don't know if they're gonna land. I don't know if I'm gonna get arrested on my legal permitted farm, because nobody's telling me anything, and everybody's just putting their hands in the air saying it's not our jurisdiction.
Right.
So thank you for coming and clarifying that.
Yeah, no problem. No, thank you. And then it's something to where, again, it's when you have a permit, I made it very, very clear. Okay, you have a permit, you don't have to fear law enforcement. You really don't. Even though in the past, there's been this us versus them mentality. That has changed. We are not at war with a plant. That's not the case whatsoever. And so legal operations, permitted grows, provisional permits, those things that you're working with the county and state, we see you as a legal licensed organization. And so we do not want to interfere with that unless we have information that says you're not. And we know people that are using this as a front. And if we catch those people, then we'll deal with them. But most of them are just trying to be lawful businesses and to deserve the protections of the law. And I want everyone to understand that. That's the point of view that I have, and it goes all the way down to the deputy sheriff level. And if anyone treats you otherwise, then I need to hear about it, because that is the mandate. And there are some people that still have a hard time with the plant because of generations of feelings. It doesn't matter. Prop 64 is passed. Proposition 215 is still there. Those are the provisions that give you the license to grow, as long as you're going through the county and the state process. And so I just wanted to make sure that you all realize that again, reaffirm that from the sheriff's office perspective. And any resources that come from outside the county is coming under my authority. And so anything other than that, they will not act out of what I just told you. And that is my authority here. Fish and Wildlife, that's their own deal. I'm talking about federal resources coming in.
Can I get you to clarify one other point? You had mentioned that you guys have pinpoint GPS and that it is all complaint driven and that there's no errors and you're going after egregious farms. And I just would like clarity on why my 67-year-old mother, who has no illegal activity, would get flown twice in a week, very low and multiple times.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. As far as there may be, as you fly over Southern Humboldt, you see a lot of greenhouses. You see a lot of activity all around. So they may be looking at another neighbor. I'm not sure what they're looking at.
Yeah, our family, we have 600 acres between friends and families, and her house is the only thing there. It has a little swimming pool, but there's no greenhouses, and there's no cannabis going on, and there's no neighbors that would be calling about anything. And we back up onto state park lands, and where it was, if you'd like, I can show you a few videos that I took where it specifically went around her house, not any surrounding areas, and it was the 8th and the week after, 2 Mondays in a row.
I would like to see that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more. I just want to explain why we're calling this community caught in the crosshairs, because some people have questions about that. It's a feeling that many citizens feel whether or not they're growing marijuana. We've been having state and regional water boards and Fish and Wildlife intensely focused here. We're having county code enforcement abatements, and there has also been the sheriff and multi-agency law enforcement raids, and now we're getting the National Guard and mobile helicopters and troops. So it's just this convergence. And even though if you're not doing anything illegal, you're not a target, you're not in the crosshairs, but when that helicopter is circling overhead, that's exactly what it feels like. Those are for humans. Then we have domestic animals and wildlife. And in the past, Mike Downey was in a helicopter off Alder Point Road circling around. Meantime, down on the ground was a horse in a corral that pretty much beat itself to death. And you can talk to him about that, because I'm sure he thought everything was cool, but he didn't notice what was going on. And if the helicopters could get up to 1,000, 2,000 feet, the impact wouldn't be as much. We're in the mountains, these canyons, and the military helicopters are like big Harleys roaring through, vibrating everything. And it's domestic animals and the wildlife. So it would be really great if you could lift up on that. Another question people have had is, we've had John Ford say they've pretty much finished with the egregious grows, and now they're going to the people that had signed up to get permits but haven't completed it, and that you've abated about 800 grows or something like that. And then we hear from the sheriff that there's thousands more out there. So we'd really like some clarification of what's going on.
So I know some people may feel like a target, but we are looking all over the county. We have a huge county. We're looking at Eastern Humboldt, Northern Humboldt. We're looking all over. And even though you may feel like you're in the crosshairs, there are a lot of different resources that we're looking at all over the county. And so we want to bring all of the illegal cultivators into compliance. That's our goal. And we're not going to stop until that happens. There are thousands and thousands of grows in our county. And yes, some have vacated. I'm happy to say that some have left because it's difficult. They've had a target on them. They feel like they're in the crosshairs, and so they've left. But there's others that have grown and have not been permitted. And they are still alive and well in the illicit market. And so we are going after those people. Those are our targets. Those are people that are truly in our crosshairs, so to speak. And even though I hate saying that, that connotation, but they are a target for us. And so those are the people that we are targeting. And I want to say that our communication with the state, with our county, has been excellent. And so those people that are working towards compliance, we know about you. So you're not one of those targets. And so yes, there's a lot out there, and John and I have different missions. We're different focused, and so but we're working together to try and bring people into compliance with the law.
If I could, thanks, Bonnie. John Ford with the Planning and Building, and I just wanted to clarify some things. Our original focus was to go after the big egregious grows first. And as we've done that, we started with the bigger grows, and we've started finding that the big egregious grows aren't as prevalent anymore. I'm not saying that there's none out there, but they're becoming harder and harder and harder to find. And what that has done is put us in a place where we are continuing to abate illegal cultivation sites. But some of the sites that we have posted notices of abatement to and notice of violation have gotten smaller. And we are priority driven. We have limited resources in terms of what we're able to do. And what we're finding right now is we want to put our resources where they're most effective and efficient. And the area that is our biggest concern right now, and priority right now, is to focus on those folks that they have submitted applications, but they're not progressing in the application process. They're typically fairly large. They typically are the ones that I hear many of you complain about. But because they have been in the process, we have not brought any enforcement action against them. So what we're targeting doing right now is using some of our code enforcement resources to take a look at those and to either encourage them to finish the permitting or to take them forward for an action by the planning commission and possibly the board, which may result in a denial of the permit. And at that point, they could potentially be subject to code enforcement. Now, that is our priority, partly because we really don't want to be having continued conversations with, as it's been euphemistically stated, the mom and pop grow sites. But at some point, one of the things that we do have an obligation to do is to, and we're working on the report to the Board of Supervisors right now, is to address all of the illicit cultivation sites, regardless of the size, that are within the priority watersheds, those that are already significantly impacted, and also those that are what are called refuge watersheds because they still support fisheries. While we're not doing a lot of additional work in those areas, we are still sending out notices to abate. We still are sending out notices of violation, not in the quantity that we have been. So when I say that there's no more big egregious grows, that's not exactly what I meant. And it doesn't mean that we're not continuing to do enforcement. It's just that we're doing very targeted enforcement to focus on those that have the worst environmental impacts of this particular thing. And so if you're a smaller cultivator and you're not in the permit system right now, what I want to encourage you to do is to either get into the permit system or to stop cultivating.
How do you decide what's on your abatement list and what's on the law enforcement list?
So from our perspective, and this is probably a two-part answer, one from the sheriff and one from planning and building, is that we go through the watersheds, we go through areas, we identify people that do not have permits, they're not in the permit process, and they are completely outside of the realm of that process provides protection to. And so we basically do areas, and I know that there have been a lot down here in South County, but as the sheriff mentioned earlier, there are a lot in the northern parts of the county, the eastern parts of the county also. We move around erratically, deliberately, so that there's not a pattern to it, and we try to give some relief sometimes because we know that there does come a point where there is enforcement fatigue, and it fatigues the community, and frankly it fatigues the staff too. So we try to balance what we do in that respect. And in terms of deciding what we've been trying to stay away from the smaller grows that are less than 6,000 to 7,000 square feet, and just focus on things that are larger than that. And that's not to say that every once in a while we don't identify one that's smaller than that. Try not to. But what we're really still trying to do is hit the larger sites, hit the most egregious sites, hit the sites that not only are illegally cultivating, but have grading involved, have illegal structures involved, and particularly those that are within the stream site management areas that have water quality impacts predominantly.
As far as targeting goes, I think I've already mentioned that we are complaint driven, but they're also, as we are flying or we're driving by something, if we see something else that looks egregious or looks like unpermitted, we will take note of that and we'll follow up on that. And so it's something that just because we're going after a specific person or a location, we're not going to ignore the other people that may be close by that are also unpermitted, that also have illegal grow sites. And we're trying to, just like Director Ford said, we're trying to focus again on different areas. So we may be doing 3 to 4 search warrants in a particular area, and because of the complaints, but also we want to make sure that we are utilizing our resources properly. I mean, it takes us 2 hours sometimes to drive from Eureka to some of these locations. And we want to make sure that if there's 2 or 3 unpermitted grows in those areas, that we make sure that we pay them a visit. And so it's all done, again, through search warrants and through directions from a judge, ordering the search and seizure of the cannabis there that's grown illegally.
Okay, it's still open for 6.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring us back a little bit to what prompted this meeting. And as the sheriff knows, I got a lot of calls from people who were in the process and people who were neighbors, etc. And I picked up the phone right away and conveyed those concerns to him. And I think, being a veteran myself of all of these years, covering this in the 80s and 90s, I understand completely the whole concept and concern about unintended consequences and what I would call collateral damage. And so I'd like to be able, if we could, to tease out how we can make the community feel better about that. I mean, you heard what Iona said, it's easy to say if you're legal and you have a permit, you have nothing to worry about. But if you're on the ground, you worry about whether or not the person up there knows. And so you say, well, are they targeting me because they don't know I'm permanent or whatever? So I'd love to be able to get a little bit more clarity if possible. And also I'd like to drill back, if you don't mind, Bonnie, to your question. I think it's important for people to understand when it is that law enforcement steps in and when it is a code enforcement thing. I think you guys tried to answer that, but I don't think it was totally clear how it came out. If you don't mind that.
So a couple things that I'm taking away from, just based upon what people say, is that one is just because we can fly 500 feet, do we have to? And so I'll be bringing that up with my people, seeing what the reason why, what was we were flying so low in some of these areas that were permitted. And if we don't, if we have such specific instrumentation there, and do we need to? If there's cameras on the helicopters, if there's those kind of things that we can utilize, then why don't we utilize that and stay above 1,000, 1,500, 2,500 feet? So I'll be following up with that to make sure that if that is a possibility, I'll make sure that happens next time, because I don't want to cause undue attention. Again, if we can do this without people knowing, that would be the ultimate goal here. And so we don't want to just fly for the sake of flying to stress people out. That's not what we want to do. And so we will be following up with that and making sure that they know the mandate, and they know that we don't want to stress people out. We don't want to bring people back to the days when you're just wondering, are these federal troops going to, come down on helicopters, going to raid, our land and land on our property. And when you don't really know, when there's a lot of anxiety from that, it's undue anxiety. So I don't want to have that happen with this community. As far as code enforcement and law enforcement interaction, if someone is in the permit process, we get a complaint, and let's say it's a complaint of a greenhouse, and they're concerned about noise from generators and light deprivation at night, with light being exposed, potential growing over their limits. Those cases get turned over to code enforcement, and code enforcement will follow up on those. What we'll do is we'll verify. When we get a complaint, is this in the permit process? Do they have a permit? And if it's just because of cultivation size or location, and have commitments. Nothing that we can follow up on. And so we will then turn that over to John Ford and his crew, and then they can follow up on it.
I just want to say that the lower the helicopters is, the more problems and possible harm that can happen on the ground. And there's a lot of people that said that a helicopter that's supposed to be at 500 feet was actually lower. Hopefully we'll hear some more of that. I just want to say that the purpose of this meeting is to provide an opportunity for people to voice their concerns and experiences and ask questions regarding the county's marijuana enforcement methods, impacts, and especially with the recent National Guard involvement of low-flying helicopter complaints. And we ask that everyone be respectful, no personal attacks. We're here to give feedback, voice concerns and suggestions, and to listen to the responses. So we'll start with our first speaker. And to be broadcast live on cable.
Okay, so let me just bend that down a little bit. There we go. So thanks for coming and listening. It might not be totally pleasant for you all. I'd like to talk about two things that have reminded us, and reminded me certainly, of the bad old days with the campaign against marijuana planting. And one is the helicopter, as you know. That National Guard helicopter is extra special loud. It's so loud that you hear it, you run out on the porch, what the hell is that? Okay? And furthermore, it was extra special low. I live at 1,500 feet, and that helicopter was going around and around and on and on. I only caught sight of it once. So it was considered, and we're at about 500 feet above sea level there, the ground over by the river. So it was flying pretty low most of that time. When that happens, it shows us that the operators, or whoever it is, have an obvious disregard or contempt for us. Our population. We know that you would not be flying your helicopter like that over the outskirts of Fortuna or Eureka. The second thing I want to say is about the destructiveness that came with the campaign against marijuana planting. There was a picture on the front page of the July 2nd Independent showing a greenhouse that had its plastic slashed by the marijuana raiders who went out there to take care of things. Made me remember a friend's place back in China Creek in the late 80s. Camp raiders had been there the day before, and they stole some small valuables. They defaced some personal photographs, and then they went and kicked in the glass out of all the windows that the person had just had custom made for the house they were building. I used to watch those guys take off from Eureka in the morning from the county building. It was a big dress-up opportunity for them, wearing their Australian bush hats and stuff, come to kick us around. We don't want that again. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want that again either. Thank you.
We'd like the next couple of speakers to come up so we won't have to wait.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Justin. I think I've spoken with everybody at least once, email, phone, calls, etc. I unfortunately actually was around in the early 80s also. I think I got a call from my landlord and said there's a bunch of trucks coming out on the road to your neighborhood. So she suggested that I tell everybody to scramble out of there. Anybody I could call or knew. And so I drove to another property where it was a high knoll, ridgetop. And unfortunately, that was exactly where they were going. It was kind of crazy. All day long, 7:30 in the morning until 7 at night, 12 hours. I think it was probably the largest haul in 1983 by the camp. And from my vantage point, they lowered the helicopter down. They were sitting on the deck of the open door Huey with an M16, sitting there, you know, scanning the hillside. And I was like, I was trapped for 12 hours on this neighbor's property. And they went after a group that known as the Washingtonians back then. They got 11,000 pounds off of that property. So I was still traumatized. I had nightmares from that, literally. And the other day, from my property here, I saw that black helicopter fly in. I'm at 1,500-foot elevation. I saw the helicopter fly right through the center of my property, up the SMA, Stream Management Area. Below my vantage point, my property is from about maybe 1,100 to 1,700 feet. So they flew right through the center of the lower part of my property, below my eye level. They came over the ridge, probably from Piercy, dropped into the valley, headed straight up the canyon, and went to wherever else they followed, Ionis or something. So that was kind of traumatic. Again, I thought they're doing this again. This is crazy. So, but the main reason I came today was to see if there's some way to speed up the permit process for those that aren't complete. Because every step of the way, there's another bill, another study, another culvert, another environmental consultant that has to be paid. And I have a unique property where it's the center of an area where there's multiple roads going through my property that are easements to other neighbors. So there's a lot of culverts. And I literally can't fix all those culverts. I don't have the money. So, I mean, I'm not a big grower. I've had more properties than I've ever had plants. So, not just here, Bay Area, Eureka, Arcata. I was a landlord and construction guy, back in the 70s. I'm fortunate to be, still alive right now. But right now, I can't make any money off this property. I can't rent it because everybody wants to grow. And it's hard to get the permit. I want to go legal because then maybe I could get some tenants again. Maybe I could get people that will take care of the property. Because as you know, for a number of years, it was difficult. I was raising my family in the Bay Area. And the tenants were, pay rent by the month. But then I find that they've got a little farm on down the logging road, at the end of the road. So the other issue with the building and planning department, the grading issue, when I got letters from, actually from the state of California, Water Board and the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then it triggered some code enforcement. I got a letter about grading that was occurring. Written. Grading is occurring on your property. So what? What grading is occurring? Well, they sent me another letter that said grading has occurred on your property. Okay, that's a good correction, thank you. Then I got the third letter, and they said, well, now you have to correct the grading violation. Well, what grading violation? Within the streamside management area. First of all, the streamside management area goes up the center of my property, where that helicopter flew the other day. There is no grading, maybe some logging roads, maybe some log decks, from a long time ago. So, but I think it was Patrick at the planning building came out to inspect the property, and instead of going to the SMA, where the violation had supposedly occurred or was occurring, he came to another portion of the property where one of my tenants had dug a pond. And I'm looking to that large graded flat where you're going to put all these like greenhouse tunnels. I'm like, what graded flat? And so we went to the pond, which was an area well above, out of the streamside management area, well above any spring. And so what do I do? You have to correct this. You have to go get an application for a permit to permit that pond. Fish and Wildlife said it was on the stream. It's like, there's no stream. So it got very complicated. I've been in this process for a while. It's very difficult, too many culverts. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is not that easy to deal with. They seem to want to trump the Water Rights Division. I have a non-jurisdictional spring that is out of the jurisdiction of the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Yet Department of Fish and Wildlife says, no, we have full control over your water. I got a letter from the head of the Water Rights Division, state of California, saying that I have a non-jurisdictional spring and they can trump Department of Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife, we don't care. You're still going to have to either remove that pond on the stream, which it isn't on the stream. So and that triggered another consultant that I had to hire. I had to hire a geologist. I've had to, just countless thousands and thousands of dollars. I'm on credit cards right now. I don't have the money to keep paying for this. It's been over 3 years. It seems like there's got to be some way you can make this process easier so that people can permit their property, so that the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Water Board will listen and be reasonable. And I don't know, what do you have to say to all that? It's difficult, very difficult process.
It's Justin, right? Yes, Justin. I think I'm going to give you
Justin Baldwin, by the way.
Thank you. I'm going to give you a kind of a general answer and then a specific answer applicable to you. Is that one of the process is difficult. I'm not going to try to say that it's not, especially for many people who have never had to deal with a governmental process before. It is completely foreign. So I get that.
I've dealt with lots of governmental, this is the difficult. I've permitted lots of buildings, won lots of lawsuits against cities. For example, last month I won a lawsuit against the city of Oakland. They destroyed a historical stone staircase, 100-year-old stone case, for a developer, so that they could put in ADA, handrails, steps, and they wanted to cover. The judge ordered them to stop. And the city of Oakland ended up having to pay over $300,000 to our attorneys. I mean, that's a waste of public resources. But yeah, I've had lots of experience with agencies, et cetera, et cetera.
So then the thing that I would say is that we try to be very clear in our communications and give direction in terms of missing information. The thing that the most effective thing I can encourage people to do is become their planner's best friend. And
one more comment on that. I know you opened up the satellite office here in Redway. I went in there the day they opened. I went in there the next day. Monday, Wednesday. I went for 2 weeks. Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday. They kept telling me, you can't deal with us directly. You have to deal with your planner in Eureka.
well, that's the wrong message. I mean, I do want names. I want to know who said that, because one of the things that
There's a different person there. They rotate.
I understand that, but one of the things I will tell the entire crowd that we're trying to do is that we can't have the entire department in Redway. So when our staff goes down to Redway, they're just going to have to deal with difficult and unfortunate circumstances and work through it with the person that's sitting across the desk from you.
I have a comment on that also. In terms of, they used to have the on-track portal, where it's supposedly
On track is dead.
Okay, then it went to Excella.
Correct.
I couldn't log in for 6 months. There was no data on the Excella program. I'm pretty sophisticated with the computer. I had a laptop in 1982. I was doing machine language programming. So I'm pretty techie. I couldn't get, the county is behind. When I submitted my site plan, it was on a version of CAD-CAM that my daughter, who's a landscape architect in San Francisco, they had to upgrade the program, apparently, because they couldn't read the file, or maybe they downloaded something instead of PDF, and they said it's too blurry. I'm like, gosh, you have a current version of CAD, you can blow this thing up to see, the dots on the dot. But so I don't know if Humboldt County is that far behind, but I'm hoping you guys are catching up.
Part of Excella is we are catching up. We're getting out of the 1980s. or at least into the 1990s now. We plan on going into the 21st century soon. Okay, it is a process. It is difficult, and it's very difficult to deal with 2,300 unique circumstances at the same time. And so I appreciate the patience in trying to do that. That's where the planners have all been assigned to work with a individual file. What I would ask you to do, if you can, I am going to be in Redway tomorrow. I will be at the Redway office. If you will email me your...
I have emailed you, I think I emailed Estelle just last week, and she forwarded the email to you. I'm still waiting on response.
I will have, okay, I will find it. I will have your file in Redway with me tomorrow, and we can work through everything.
I'll be there.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
By the way, we are going to have an open house tomorrow at the Planning Building. Starting, it'll go all day as far as people being able to drop in, but we'll have a ribbon cutting at 10 a.m. This is pretty historic. It's the first time we've had a planning building down here in southern Humboldt, and it is for these very kind of situations where people can go in. And as Director Ford said, he will be here for a good part of the day. I encourage people to drop by and talk with him and also get to know the whole thing. But part of the reason that they can do it now and provide the kind of services that they haven't been able to do in the past is that it's as if you were in Eureka in terms of access to the records and all of that, because everything's computerized. So I really hope people will take advantage of that.
Could I get Dottie and Mark up here to come up and speak after Tom, please?
Hi, Tom Grover. Thank you so much for coming, and I think we're really making some progress here in understanding these issues. And I think you've made some progress in getting rid of a lot of the big roads. I noticed there's a lot less crazy trucks on the road. There still are, unfortunately. The problem with the big military helicopter is not only the mass of it and just the vibrations and whatever that it exerts on the ground is far more intense than any of this other stuff. Another problem is it's supposed to be clearly marked, and it doesn't have numbers on it. So if it doesn't have numbers on it, then it's not recorded in the flight data stuff, so people really don't know who it is or what it is. And as people have pointed out, everyone says, well, it's not ours, you know, and nobody really knows. Another issue is the 500 feet that you're supposed to be. These are very, very steep hills, and I understand you're trying to get under to look in the greenhouse, and I understand that problem. The problem is are you measuring that 500 feet? Is he looking at his altimeter? Because I look out and he's straight across from me. I didn't circle my place or anything like that, but he was going down the valley and he wasn't 500 feet off of the bottom of the creek there, and he was horizontal with my property. He wasn't over my place, and he probably wasn't within 500 feet. But last time we had this problem, all due respect to the sheriff here, the sheriff lied about being above 500 feet, and if you weren't really on that chopper, you don't really know how this came down. And that's not a personal thing, but it's the same sheriffs, and I don't know whether it's them that didn't do it or whether it's a 500 foot, but that's a big problem that exists with doing that, is this sheer impact on the children, on the horses, on the animals. It spooked a lot of animals in the past. To answer another question somebody brought up, is the State Water Resources Control Board is supposed to be the lead agency in this, and Fish and Wildlife is not really responding to that because they have been charged with enforcement, and they're not really getting their commands from above as they should be, and that's a real dysfunction coming from the Water Board. And unfortunately, there's a bunch of yahoos out there that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, unfortunately, and there's no one really accounting for that. And then that makes the same problems with getting permits and extorting people for fixing culverts when it isn't the issue involved, and then that makes them illegal. The question that I had was, Sheriff Hunsel, you said twice that if there was a complaint, anything over 6 plants would be eradicated. That's not my understanding. Can you, in other words, it's supposed to be 12 unsexed plants or 2 households, which is 6 per. Can you explain where I'm having a problem?
Well, we're not interested in going after someone's personal use of marijuana, where they're growing 6 plants, where they have the product from those 6 plants, whether they're driving with an ounce of marijuana. That's not something that we really, want to be involved with. But anything above 6 plants, what Prop 64 has laid out, that does generate a possible criminal complaint. And I'm not saying that we're going to be inspecting everyone that has 7 plants. However, if we happen to be at a location and there is more than 6 plants there could be enforcement action taken. There could be. I'm not saying that there will be. We see a lot more than just 6 plants being grown all over this county. And like we said before, we're going after the most egregious violators of the law, and we are pursuing those. And so someone's personal backyard grow, where they're growing for their personal use, they might even still have a 215 card, and with their doctor's recommendation current, and those are still good as long as they're not selling to a dispensary. And if it's personal use, then as long as they have within those recommendation guidelines, it's not going to be a criminal violation. And so it's one of those things that I can't say, we're not going to act, because there may be circumstances where we would act if someone had over 6 plants. But as far as our marijuana unit and our eradication unit, we are targeting those illicit grows that are growing commercially, that are some of the biggest, environmental violators, and essentially, doing all that harm to the environment. We're targeting those people first.
I hear you, and I appreciate your work, and I appreciate the problems you have doing this. However, 64 does say you can have 2 households, which makes it 12 plants. So I was wondering, I'm trying to stay within the things just the same as anyone else. I am a medical patient, and so that's why I wondered about this 6 or 12. It should be 12, shouldn't it?
Well, it's per residence, and so that's how we interpret it.
Well, it's per homestead, I believe. A household is what.
We're not going to be splitting hairs here. If there's 12 plants and there's 2 people sharing the same plot of land, we're not going to be necessarily targeting again. If there's a reason for us to walk away from 12 plants, we're going to do that. We have other things. We have other things to do, and I think we all can agree we have a lot more issues in Southern Humboldt than 12 plants.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just one clarifying thing. When there's multiple agencies involved with here in Humboldt County, the Sheriff's Department is the lead agency, not Fish and Wildlife or water boards.
So Fish and Wildlife does do search warrants in this county. They are the lead for their search warrants, and oftentimes we will assist them with their search warrants, just like they would assist us. When it's our search warrants, we are the lead for them. But they have targeted some watersheds that they're going after. They want to do search warrants, and we will support them on those. And we made it clear, if they're in the permit process, if they're permitted, we will not go to those with them. If they want to pay them a visit and essentially like a code enforcement issue, then they can go pay them a visit. But we will not look at them as far as criminal goes when they're in the process or have a permit, unless we have, again, information that shows that they are on the illicit market.
So if you're going with Fish and Wildlife, let's just say, and there's some problem, your guys are there, maybe you've got the National Guard, who's responsible?
So we will not, only our search warrants will we bring National Guard, where we're the lead. And the Fish and Wildlife, to my knowledge, they do not involve the National Guard on their search warrants. Now there's, again, multi-disciplines that are going. There is State Water Resources Board. We do have code enforcement. We have CAL FIRE. We have, like we said, CDFW. We have environmental health. We have a lot of state regulatory agencies that actually go with us and also go with CDFW on their search warrants. When it's our search warrant, we have the lead. We will bring in, some National Guard resources when it's appropriate, but it's not on every search warrant. Hi, Dottie. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Dottie Russell. I have had many opportunities to talk to all three of you. So you know me by name and probably my home phone number. So I just gave you a card because I'm going to bring up a lot of points, and obviously it would take hours for you to go over the points that I'm going to bring up. So you can just mark them down and give them to whoever you want to have call me, and maybe we can address this. So first of all, to add a little bit of humor, hopefully, I got an abatement. Now that in itself is really hysterical. So one of the reasons that I got an abatement is in question. So I was out of town. I got a telephone call from a tenant that said that they got home and on this gate there was an abatement letter. So first of all, the people that had been the ex-tenants had tried to get a permit, had been told they'd get a permit, had been doing everything possible. Ed Denson was their lawyer. They paid lots of money, and they finally got so sick of the process. They say, pass, we're leaving, we don't want anything to do with this property. Okay, so thank you very much. Property value went down, along with everybody else's property value in Southern Humboldt. But now on top of that, so that person's long gone, okay? And so then a new person comes to live there, doesn't want a permit, signs an agreement not to grow cannabis, and wants to have a farm for produce. So what happens? He's moving in, he gets this abatement letter that everything has to be moved off the property. Now fortunately, Warren Black, for us, was amazing. I called him and I'm like, you want to come tomorrow? I'm out of town, but you can come tomorrow. There's no cannabis there. And so he's like, no, that's not necessary. Just, read the form. And so we got back, we read the form, and the form was insane. The form was like water diversion, electrical who knows what, illegal grading, whatever, cannabis this, cannabis that, and everything. There was not one cannabis plant on this property. But he said, well, just go with us. It's like, okay, what do you want me to do? And I'm kind of one of these, okay, I'll roll over and play dead. What do you want me to do? Jump on one foot. Okay, fine, I'll do it. I just don't want a problem. So he's like, move everything off the property. So that means this person starting a farm that sells his produce to restaurants had to move all of the pots, the black pots and metal stakes and whatever else was there. It was the stupidest thing I have ever heard anybody do in a lifetime, and I'm 70 years old. Okay, so I can't even believe that happened. So the good thing was that I was in the newspaper, the first one on the list of abatements. So everybody that thought I was the enemy came in and it's like, hey, give me 5, you got an abatement too. So now I'm part of the group. That's the only good thing about what happened. It was wrong. It cost me a lot of money to move pots and soil off the property that was being used for growing vegetables. And who's going to pay me back for that? So that's one question. The other thing is I've been working since I got here which was 20 years ago, to work with special ed population. So I've been going to Humboldt Homeless and Housing Coalition meetings. I've been trying to get people off the streets. I've been trying to work with Redwood Coast Action Agency, all for free, doing my best to help. Now we have how many more people with PTSD? How many more people that can't handle this? How many more teenagers and children that are going through this? These helicopters need to stop now, period. Done, no more. So, and as far as my properties are concerned, if you have a concern for my properties, you all have my phone number. Pick up the phone, call me. You're invited down tomorrow. I don't have anything to hide. Most of these people don't. I don't want a helicopter over a 3-year-old who, you know, that maybe has, you know, some diagnosis that we don't want to go into because it's a HIPAA law that you don't even go into it. I don't want anybody to go through that. I don't want you to have to get calls. This whole thing is crazy. And years ago, I think in the 70s, there was a book called Winning Through Intimidation. That needs to stop, because winning through intimidation is what's going on right now, and it needs to stop, and it's wrong. And you're creating lifetimes, generations of lifetimes of drama and trauma to this community, and it needs to stop. You know, the other thing, the county assessor's office, are they reducing our property taxes by half? Because our properties are worth half. So McGuire and Wood came to this same building, and we had a meeting, and they said, what we want to do is bring you all into compliance. We want to work together. We want to be there together, and I honestly believe they meant that. At the meeting, I said, well, how do we know what to do, and what's the deal with the permits? And the fellow that was the head person to give permits said to me, which was a little bit embarrassing, said, Mrs. Russell, your property is the ideal piece of property that we want to be used for cannabis, because dry farming can be used, all of these things, it's big enough, whatever. We want properties like that. So the last day to get permits, my husband and I decided to go and at least find out what it was all about. So we walked in, and it was kind of like Tiffany's was having a sale in Beverly Hills. I mean, there was more money flying all over that place than anything you can imagine. The Brinks truck coming and going, and suitcases and satchels full of hundreds of thousands of dollars. I thought it was about the little people. I mean, I'm pretty naive, but I thought it was about the people of this community. I thought it was about we were all working together. So I got my number, I stood in line, and then I went up to the desk. Crazy, another crazy experience. And I said, okay, so I want to find out about a permit. And they looked at me and they said, do you have your permit application completed? And I said, no, what does it take and what do I have to do to get started? And they said, sorry, you're too late, you can't get one. After the meeting where Wood and McGuire were that said your property is the perfect piece of property, I went. So then I said, okay, so then what do I do? So it was like this random thing, okay, come back some other day, we'll be in touch, whatever. So the next thing that I got was, okay, well, we've decided not to do any more permits now, and now we put it on hold. And all this. So I don't know what to tell you, but Southern Humboldt has crashed and burned. And now you're taking the crap. I mean, we were in the Northridge earthquake, and that was really bad, and this is about the same. So what's happening to people, they're leaving, they're losing things, they can't eat, they're losing their properties. We have a little market, and our market has gone down, along with the other businesses in Southern Humboldt, by about 60%. So we're all in crisis. We need to come together in graciousness and goodness, and we need to make this right, because this is a really damaged community now, and there are people that have really good, sincere hearts, and a lot of people that were growing cannabis to give it away for free for people that had children with seizures. And we're picking on those people, and that really stinks, and we gotta make this right.
sure if you want to make any comments to that, but I do have another question.
I think I have more questions than comments. When you mentioned that you were told that there was no more permitting, that must have been some time ago, because we're accepting permits now. There was a settlement agreement associated with the original ordinance that gave a sunset date to accepting new applications. And so there was a period of time where we couldn't accept new applications. We did go through and write a new ordinance and prepared an environmental impact report so that now applications can be received, and we are in the process of taking in new applications. I understand the frustration with having to remove things that didn't have anything to do with cannabis. I am a little surprised by that. Normally, while we do hear lots and lots of explanations in terms of why people shouldn't have to take infrastructure off their property, if they can clearly demonstrate to us, and there are a couple of instances where people have demonstrated that they absolutely are growing fruits and vegetables, and one person even went so far, I think, as to provide 2 years worth of receipts for a local farmer's market. We were like, that's fine, that's not a cannabis impact, there is no violation there. So it's interesting for me to hear some of the public comments, because that's internally not how we think. And if that's how we're coming across, that's very concerning to me, because we work hard to try to work with people, although we also work hard to be fair, because everybody has a unique story.
Just one thing about the permits, and thank you for telling us all that permits can be gotten now, whatever. I don't think the intent of the voters or McGuire and Wood, and probably Miss Estelle, and maybe all of you, wasn't so that to pull a permit you needed $100,000. I thought it was so that little people doing little things could have a little garden and maybe make some money on it, or maybe have a smaller garden. So I have a piece of property. They said at the meeting with McGuire and Wood it was the perfect piece of property. I encourage you to offer some permits to people that maybe need it for their own medical or for whatever reason. A small amount of this, divide it up. I don't care how you divide it up. You can deal with the permits, give it to them for free, whatever. Have it a model place where people that want a small something in their life have it, and you can use that property, and it can be what everybody's supposed to be doing, and you can use it for free. I'll pay the mortgage payment.
If I could, thank you, Dottie. I appreciate the sentiment. I do want to say that I know people have spent entirely too much money in some cases to get permits. That's really difficult to watch. I've also watched people do the permitting entirely on their own and not pay for a consultant. They've just paid, you know, it's a few $1,000s, $10,000, I'll say, for the county permit, that they've been able to do it for that. And so there is a divergence there in some cases in terms of people's experience. One of the things that's really important for Humboldt County to understand right now is that the people who have successfully gone through the county process are now having success at the state level with the state annual licensing. The County of Humboldt is leading the state in terms of the number of permits that are being issued. That's not necessarily just simply because it's a volume issue. It's because the people who are coming out of Humboldt County are prepared to deal with the state. And so while it sounds great for us to give permits away, the thing that we would then be doing is putting people in a position where they would fail at the state. And so they would be no more legal. And so it's, what you're saying sounds great. I would love to give permits away. But people have to be in compliance and they have to be successful at the county and the state level in order for this thing to work. And that is difficult.
Hi, my name's Mark Hilofsky. My husband and I own a property on Wilder Ridge. One day our tenants informed us of a gunfight that took place in the driveway of the next door neighbor back in January. It was at the edge of our property. The property is owned by Ivan Ilyev. He is the individual who owned the property where the 10,000-pound bust occurred last November. We filed a report with the sheriff and asked planning department not to issue a grow permit for this property. You guys had no idea about it. We also spoke to 2 federal agencies who were investigating Mr. Ilyev. We were asked to speak to them. In an email from your department, Stephen Luther said that the permit would probably not be issued because of an ongoing investigation by the sheriff. Then Mr. Luther tells us good news, as he puts it, that the property next door would not be permitted, but instead, under the RRR program, the 22,000 square feet of grow was being transferred to another property in Honeydew that my neighbor also owns. So my problem became somebody else's problem in Honeydew. There's a very wonderful lady with an animal rescue that has to deal with that right next door. So you went ahead and issued a permit to organize crime. That looks very suspicious to me.
So I assume there's a question in there, or you're looking for a response?
A response, yeah. What's going on?
So one of the things that is important to recognize is that the county's land use ordinance is focused on land use.
Mm-hmm.
And while we permit applicants, the primary permit is to the property. And so, whereas the state license is to an individual,
Mm-hmm.
our permits tend not to be. Now, where that takes a little bit of a turn is where, in a situation where we've got an applicant who has an interim permit, who's already operating, and is demonstrating that they cannot operate in compliance with what the ordinance requires to be the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
So if there are grounds because of past action, because of ongoing behavior and things that could legitimately be used to deny a permit, we would deny a permit or recommend that the Planning Commission deny a permit based upon those grounds.
Okay.
The struggle is that we don't necessarily have conclusive proof. We don't have information documenting whether or not somebody has behaved badly, illegally, or not in the past. And frankly, those are not findings that can be used to deny a permit.
Okay. Matole Canyon Creek, that was his?
I'm not...
Matole Canyon Creek, that was what everyone was crying about, where they did these egregious environmental, the grading and all that, Fish and Wildlife's looking into it, that was his. I don't know.
Obviously, those are grounds by which a permit can be denied. And if a permit is granted and they behave outside the limits of the permit, outside the limits of what the ordinance allows, the permit can be revoked.
Okay. It's just amazing, you know, somebody that has a bust like that. You, Sheriff, dealt with him. You know who he is. Kidnapping, they were going after him. That was my next door neighbor. I'm tired of hearing all kinds of horrible stories from that place. You guys gonna do anything about it, or you're gonna keep permitting him?
I'm aware of what's going on, and I can't comment on ongoing investigations.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
The next question is there a database for 215, or can you submit doctor's orders to officials to not worry about coming in?
That's a fantastic question, one of the things that obviously has been coming up a lot. So the allowance for the doctor's note comes out of 215, and that was written as a way to avoid criminal prosecution. That is not an exemption to land use permitting. And so somebody may have a doctor's note, and I was working with a gentleman 2 weeks ago that had a doctor's note for 99 plants. And so while the sheriff may not prosecute or go after criminal charges there, that person still is subject to local land use law. And so producing anything above the 6 plants or 100 square feet on less than an acre, 200 square feet less than 5 acres, anything beyond that, while they're not subject to criminal prosecution, they still need a land use permit to have that volume of cannabis being cultivated.
Good afternoon. So I'm a foreigner, as you can see. I'm a total outsider here, but I'm very devoted to these people. I've been coming here for 7 years, and I'm very involved with what they do because I'm like a winemaker. I use their resin to make a finished product. So I need a product of high quality to do what I do. And it is pretty painfully obvious for an outsider that you don't understand their value. I'm trying to fight for creating appellation d'origine like in other agricultural products in Mendocino, Humboldt, and Trinity, so that nobody can use your name around the world. And it's painfully obvious that you don't treat cannabis small farmers the same way that you treat other small farmers using other agricultural products. If I see the regulation between vineyard and cannabis farmer, it's pretty obvious that there is still a demonization of the plant, and there is no local help to help those small farmers to actually get the license. You're flying helicopters that cost thousands of dollars an hour, and you have access to grade army technology so that you can not only see how many plants there is on the field, but you can literally count how many leaves there is on those plants. You don't need to fly helicopter. You can definitely pinpoint the place. Maybe deep down in the forest, yeah, you may have problem, but helicopter wouldn't do it either. You have imaging with infrared, you can see anything, anywhere. You don't need to fly anything. That money, if you could invest it in helping the small farmer getting those license, it's really super helpful. I can feel your wish to help us, to help those people, but it's the whole legalization. You're still looking at those people as old hippie. There's the future of a multi-billion-dollar industry. You can create here in California what the wine industry created in Bordeaux and in France. So it's really painful to see those people not really understood, but put into places where they really struggle to be able to just make a living, when you should really help us to bring California and Northern California to a level where it's a new industry that is being born. It's a multi-billion industry that is not yet defined. You could create everything that the wine industry created in the 1800s and become what France is to the wine industry, be relevant for the 100 years coming. Thank you.
My name is Scott Tenney, and I don't get along with microphones real well, but I live in Weon. I have 2 adjacent 1-acre parcels. At one time, we had like a 215 collective, but anymore with this new white market, I just grow my own doctor-recommended personal recommendation. Now, that's enough about me. First of all, people that would shoot each other over something as silly as pot have a mental problem. They need mental counseling. All right, that's enough about that. To a comment for our planner, Mr. Ford. Based on what I hear about this permit process on the mud and from other people, I feel blessed that I don't have enough land to apply for a permit. I mean, $10,000 for a permit to have a small farm, really, in this market? That's enough about that. Now, a comment for Sheriff Hansel. Is that how you pronounce your name?
That's correct.
Operation Clean Sweep? Really? Operation Clean Sweep? That sounds like a military operation. One would think that the North Coast deserves something better than a military operation. I'm done.
So I too want to thank you for coming down here and spending your Sunday afternoon getting yelled at. I happened to be on Cayman on Monday morning, July 8th as a programmer, and I couldn't believe my ears as the calls started coming in. Cayman obviously is ground zero for these sorts of things. And the first call that came in, I questioned the caller. Are you sure? Military helicopter? No, you can't be, but obviously they were correct. Sheriff Hansel, you were a kid in 1983 when we started to endure 15 years of helicopter terrorism. And I don't use that word lightly. It was terrorism, and it was specifically designed as a terror campaign. And that went on 4 months a year for about 15 years, 4 days a week. And the results of that were traumatizing to this community. There are kids who will never forget that. There are veterans who get triggered PTSD. And we endured that. And when I got those calls that Monday morning, I was amazed that I was experiencing deja vu all over again. That 3 years, 4 years after legalization, that this was the way that the Sheriff's Department and the state had decided they were going to deal with people out of compliance. That was the method that you chose, given the history of this community. I was in shock and disbelief. This organization, CLIMP, the David to the Goliath of the state, was formed in 1983, immediately following the first helicopter invasions of the community. And this little organization was able to get a federal judge to recognize the inappropriateness of the activities of camp, which were at that point under no restraints at all. And I happen to have a copy of the consent decree in my pocket. And I'm just going to read one piece of it. Defendants are enjoined from using helicopters for general surveillance purposes except over open fields. When conducting surveillance over open fields, helicopters shall not fly within 500 feet of any structure, person, or vehicle. Helicopters surveying open fields in the vicinity of residential structures shall not fly within the hemisphere extending 500 feet from the outer circumference of the curtilage of any residence, and shall not survey any home or curtilage. Now, I understand that this consent decree expired. However, subsequent sheriffs, Sheriff Renner, Sheriff Lewis, Sheriff Philp, Sheriff Downey, I may be missing a sheriff. Am I missing a sheriff? Did I get them all?
Got it.
Good. Okay. All committed to continuing compliance with this order, even though they were not under federal mandate to do so, because it made sense, because it protected this community. But really, this begs the question. And to me, I have not heard anything today which justifies the use of helicopters at all to do what you need to do. I grant that you need to get warrantable evidence that you need to be able to take to a judge to sign a warrant. I get that. But 25 years ago, I was at graduate school at Humboldt State, and I took a course which included remote sensing. That was 25 years ago. And the technology was there to basically read license plates from space. Now, I understand you need physical, but the National Guard assets certainly include fixed-wing aircraft with the highest available technology at this time. You do not need helicopters. Helicopters are instruments of terror. And go to the Grumman website, go to the United Technologies website. Those are the people who make helicopters. Look at the pictures of those websites, and you will see they are poised as terror, as instruments of terror. That's part of their purpose. That's part of their design. They are unacceptable here in this community, especially when you have alternatives. I mean, it's fun to ride helicopters. Estelle knows this. She's taken helicopter rides. Cops in joyriding helicopters is not what we need. We do not need joyriding sheriffs in our helicopters, or helicopters at all. You can do it with other means. So, Estelle, I'd like to give you some unsolicited advice, and that is that it would be politic to side with your community in this matter rather than with the sheriff and provide mealy-mouthed defenses for him as you did on the radio a couple days after that. That would be in your political interest to do so. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
I do want to say one thing as far as that goes, and what Estelle's phone calls were after this, is that she did voice several concerns about the community and the thoughts of using the National Guard helicopter, National Guard resources, and we've had lengthy follow-up conversations regarding that. So she has, because I was 10 in 1983, and I didn't grow up in Southern Humboldt. I didn't experience things that you are describing here today, but I will be, again, taking those things back to my team and asking some really tough questions and see if there are alternatives. So I will follow up, and I appreciate your words today.
Well, I want to thank everybody for giving such heartfelt testimony on exactly what this means. As you know, as the sheriff just said, I knew as soon as I heard and got those phone calls what kind of impact this was going to have on the community. And I take it very seriously, as the sheriff said. I've already spoken with him. I've also talked with the planning department, saying what can we do about all the kind of information they have. I'm not saying I did that on a political level. I did that from the heart as a member of this community and somebody who dearly loves living here and loves the rural lifestyle. And that is quite an intrusion on the rural lifestyle. A lot of times people from other areas don't understand that people live out in the rural areas for peace and quiet, away from the mad crowds. And so having this kind of activity is very, very troubling to me. And I think the sheriff has heard loud and clear what the impact has been on the community. And I know Bonnie has been drilling down on, can you do it from a higher level if you have to go in and get these kind of things? I look forward to seeing things be much improved, because honestly, the stories that I heard on that first day really reminded me of those days and the fact that they were just circling around. And I would say, I would ask the sheriff that if they are going to use the helicopters, you have people on those helicopters who understand what people are talking about here today and respect the rural community. I think that that's very, very important.
Hi. Oh. My name is Pat, and I'm just wondering, how do you know the boundaries of the land that you're going to bust? Like, you know, like there's national land, and then there's land that the people have, there's county and there's state licenses. And I'm just wondering how, you know, you can detect that from the air.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we do have detailed maps. We do look at GPS coordinates. And like I said, using helicopters gives us the most precise location that we can use. Fly over and hit a GPS. Airplanes, not so much. But we can get close. But with using military technology and be able to utilize that, whether it's in a fixed wing or a helicopter, can get us precise where that location is, and then we can compare it to the county APN number and verify whether or not they have a permit.
Right, I understand that. Back in the day, though, that wasn't going on. You know, it was basically Yahoo, and nobody knew where they were, and it was chase them around.
Well, and I mean, it is difficult in the community, as we know, driving down the country roads, and there's not a lot of gates that are marked. There's not a lot of addresses marked. Hey, this is the place you're looking for. Come this way, Right. And so there's times when we drive on the wrong property.
Yeah.
Looking for, and so that's why it's important that we follow up and make sure that we know exactly where we are going. And that's why it's important that people do have all of their documentation on scene, and we have shown up at the wrong location. People said, hey, oh no, that's not us. We're permitted. You're looking for the person next door. And so we're able to get to that location because of that, because things look different from the air than they do on the ground.
Yeah. Another question I have is for John Ford, and it's like, how is the accountability for all the money that comes into the office for the state and county for getting the licenses? Where does all that money go? And the abatement money?
No, thank you. That's a great question. So in terms of the money that comes in associated with the application fees, we have detailed billing for and accounting for all the time that we spend. And so that is provided to the applicants. They know how we're spending their money.
Is that a public record?
Yes.
Okay.
And in terms of the abatement money, one of the things that we've intentionally done is taken that out of our budget, so it comes in and it goes into basically a trust that then that's up to the Board of Supervisors to decide what happens with that money.
Oh, okay. And another question, I just was wondering, when you guys were flying around, you did circle the senior housing in Garberville, and I was just a little surprised. I'm like, What's out there?
I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know either,
Yeah.
but, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's about all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. If, they're circling the senior center or wherever they are, what should citizens do to find out who it is and what's going on?
So the aircraft, to my knowledge, should be marked. They will not fly blacked out. Even at night, you will have lights on a military helicopter if they're being used by us or someone else. I mean, the only time I think they can fly without lights is wartime, and we are not at war, okay? So I think that's very, very important. And I will make sure that those, if we do use military aircraft in the future, that it will be appropriately marked. And so, like I said before, we're not going to tell people when we're going to fly. We're not going to do that. I know it may alienate some people. You know, we're not going to do that. But we will respect. We will look at the altitude that we fly. Like I said, we'll look at other alternatives to that, and we will follow up with a future meeting. Maybe I'll come on your show, Bonnie, and we can talk about that, about maybe some possible changes, so the community is aware of that.
Okay, so you won't tell people ahead of time, but what happens if it's flying around and Caymans gives out the calls and whatever? Are we going to be able to find out what is currently going on?
If it's a part of some kind of a rescue operation, there's times when we do use National Guard for rescue operations. We will let people know about that right away, what it's there for, and we will advertise that immediately. If we don't respond to it, then people can probably surmise that it's being used for aerial surveillance for targeted locations. If you believe that they are under 500 feet, please film them with your cell phones, and we can identify that and look at that. There are times when military helicopters are in Humboldt County that are not being utilized by the Sheriff's Office. And so it's important that we would say then, again, this is not us. We are not utilizing that Black Hawk or whatever helicopter or aircraft that is. So people are aware of that.
Yeah, and we really want to encourage people to document, take photographs, and if they meet some of these people in the field, they have a right to photograph them.
Absolutely.
And how about the visible ID? In the past, sheriff deputies had their name tags covered up with some backpack or I don't know.
So the sheriff's deputies will have a badge on display. Any National Guard will have proper identification on them. We'll have National Guard patches on them and will be with us. They will not be working independently. So that will be something that you can see and use. The sheriff's deputies will have their names on display and or ID numbers, so they'll be readily available to see that. And you have every right to photograph, but if they are coming into a scene and they're trying to make a scene safe, please be in compliance with what they're asking. If they're asking you to show hands, to sit down, to step aside, please do that. There's time to debate later on whether or not there's an issue there. We don't want confrontation and a use of force unnecessarily when they're going and serving a search warrant.
The name tags and the badge, I mean, you got to be very, very close to see. So will any of these people we encounter in the field, if asked, identify themselves, their name, and their agency?
Alienate some people. We're not going to do that. But we will respect. We will look at the altitude that we fly. Like I said, we'll look at other alternatives to that, and we will follow up with a future meeting. Maybe I'll come on your show, Bonnie, and we can talk about that, about maybe some possible changes, so the community is aware of that.
Okay, so you won't tell people ahead of time, but what happens if it's flying around and Caymans gives out the calls and whatever? Are we going to be able to find out what is currently going on?
If it's a part of some kind of a rescue operation, there's times when we do use National Guard for rescue operations. We will let people know about that right away, what it's there for, and we will advertise that immediately. If we don't respond to it, then people can probably surmise that it's being used for aerial surveillance for targeted locations. If you believe that they are under 500 feet, please film them with your cell phones. And we can identify that, look at that. There are times when military helicopters are in Humboldt County that are not being utilized by the Sheriff's Office. And so it's important that we would say then, again, this is not us. We are not utilizing that Black Hawk or whatever helicopter or aircraft that is. So people are aware of that.
Yeah, and we really want to encourage people to document, take photographs, and if they meet some of these people in the field, they have a right to photograph them.
Absolutely.
And how about the visible ID? In the past, sheriff deputies had their name tags covered up with some backpack or I don't know.
So the sheriff's deputies will have a badge on display. Any National Guard will have proper identification on them. We'll have National Guard patches on them and will be with us. They will not be working independently. So that will be something that you can see and use. The sheriff's deputies will have their names on display and or ID numbers, so they'll be readily available to see that. And you have every right to photograph, but if they are coming into a scene and they're trying to make a scene safe, please be in compliance with what they're asking. If they're asking you to show hands, to sit down, to step aside, please do that. There's time to debate later on whether or not there's an issue there. We don't want confrontation and a use of force unnecessarily when they're going and serving a search warrant.
The name tags and the badge, I mean, you got to be very, very close to see. So will any of these people we encounter in the field, if asked, identify themselves, their name, and their agency?
Yes, so they're required, every law enforcement agency is required throughout the state to identify themselves. Name, badge number, agency, that's a requirement. It's part of our policy. And this will be a part of our policy. Every time that we have an operation, we have everyone's name down on who's involved in that operation. So it's something that we can follow up on. So if you make a complaint, you ask for someone's name, it's our operation, they didn't provide you the name, I have those names. I'll be able to tell who was there, and if it's a certain agency that's not identifying, I don't want them there in future operations. Everyone knows what they're doing when they come in here and what authority they come under. And so if they're not there to be in compliance with the law and common courtesy as well, then I don't want them back. So please let me know.
So if you ask somebody and they don't respond, take a picture. If you don't have a camera, write down their description. Okay.
Bonnie, I just wanted to reflect a little bit because I know we talked earlier about there being a lot of veterans in here. It's a different kind of veteran. And I know you were a veteran of the Civil Liberties Monitoring Project, formerly known as Citizens Observation Group. And in those days, there were, or maybe not, but it was cameras. And what I wanted to say more, though, is that I don't believe that the Sheriff's Office was as transparent then as it is now. And I think people do need to take advantage of the fact that the Sheriff does have a public information officer who will be able to give out as much information as they can and really use that. And as you said, there's always cell phones nowadays. Every one of those is a camera. So.
Okay.
I just have a question. I was in a work situation about a month and a half ago in Hayfork, and I was approached by law enforcement officers with weapons. And I was just going to a work situation. It was the National Guard. They did have firearms. They didn't point them at me, but they were definitely carrying them.
Yeah. So there's that's Trinity County, obviously.
Yeah.
And so they have.
I grew up in Humboldt County.
Right.
So a helicopter scares the hell out of me.
I get it.
And twin-engine planes flying over the place I'm working on scares me too. And law enforcement with guns scares
And we do recognize that when we do serve search warrants, there oftentimes there's workers working on generators, there's people putting up structures, and oftentimes people that are responsible for those growing operations aren't on scene, and there are a bunch of workers there. We understand
that too.
Yes, because in the past we have had violent confrontations in marijuana grows, we do have to be armed when we serve a search warrant until we make everything as safe as
They
possible.
did show me search warrants.
Yes.
And said I could continue working and doing what I was doing.
Well, that was good, because sometimes everyone's going to put some handcuffs and then set
Aside.
aside.
I was on a neighboring property, but we were still greeted with guns, search warrants, and we were just going through.
Yeah.
And it definitely was the National Guard.
Right, and Trinity County does utilize a lot of federal resources. They are a small county as far as their sheriff's office goes, and so they rely on the Forest Service a whole lot more. They rely on the National Guard a whole lot more, and so they do have a lot of those resources for sure.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So you're saying the National Guard's not going to be armed?
During the flight operations, they're not going to be armed. During the service of a search warrant, they could be armed. They are part of a law enforcement operation, and it's all based upon their protocol of when they do. I mean, when they go into the National Forest and serve search warrants, they are armed during that course. The National Guard, when they come and help us during the search warrants, they're not going to be there actually cutting plants. They're going to be there to assist us with other things that are there, but they're not going to be actually cutting plants when we are serving search warrants here in the county.
So one big thing is when there was all this talk about the National Guard, it was going to be on public lands. So everybody here is talking about private lands and what's going on. How many National Guard troops are going to be here and on the ground?
So, thinking about the last couple of years, we've had anywhere from 3 to 5 assist us with our operations, and that's pretty much, I think, what we're going to expect this year. 3 to 5 National Guardsmen helping us with search warrants. So it's not a huge number, but it's something that we can use, and it can be, it helps us with labor, it helps us with a lot of things, with processing the scenes, and it assists us a lot.
So they're not going to be cutting down plants, but what are they going to be doing?
They can help us haul plants, they can help us destroy the plants, they can assist with documentation. So those are, but their mandate is when it's on private land, they're not going to be cutting any plants.
Did they have special training?
They all have special training on this? Yes, they do.
Okay. In the past, when camp was all over the place, they were cutting water lines and destroying water tanks and stuff. I haven't heard any of that, and I hope that we don't, because we have extreme fire danger.
Absolutely. That if anyone sees that kind of activity out there, I need to hear about it. That is not tolerated. That may have happened in the past. We will not tolerate that in the future. Destroying infrastructure is not what we do. That's not our job. We may take a generator. We may take lights. We may take those things that people are using to grow illegally, and we may take that kind of stuff. But we're not there to destroy water lines. The reason why we cut greenhouses at times are because, one, is security measures. 2 is the environmental factor. A lot of times we know that people have unpermitted grows, they're using pesticides and chemicals on their grows that, are illegal. And so for ventilating the greenhouses and utilizing the fresh air, and also to look around, have a 360 view of what's going on around you. Because it is still dangerous. When we oftentimes go to a search warrant, people run when they're there doing illegal operations. And then we don't know where they go. And so the fear is that they're going, getting a weapon, they're coming back. We have seen security there, but also the people that are cutting down marijuana, they're taking off all of their protective gear, because it is labor intensive, as we know. and they're taking off their gear and they are cutting the plants. And it's oftentimes their backs are to different places. So we have to ventilate these greenhouses. We're not destroying the greenhouses and taking down the structures, but we do that for our safety.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Thank you everyone for doing this. I've been a part of this conversation my whole life. I just happen to come from the northern part of this conversation. And these helicopters have definitely unsettled me. As all three of you know, I have been a very strong fighter for legalization because of the degradation not only to our environment, but to our social structure, to our children, to my own personal life, the traumas I've had because of living under the oppression of a drug war. I fought for legalization because I never thought I'd have to sit on the river and hear helicopters coming through my valley again in my life. And now I am dealing with my own PTSD from the newspaper pictures, from the sounds. And I really feel like that this is a new day and age, and I so appreciate your level of compassion, Sheriff Hansel, and I think we need to approach this through a compassionate view. And I really believe it is time for the Sheriff's Department to have a cannabis-oriented, someone from this legacy liaison. Because a lot of what I hear you say, knowing you and having conversations with you around it, scares us because of the way you say it too. This happens in this industry constantly. It's also because you don't fully understand what that impact. And then I think about your officers. You know, we are in a whole new, you said you were 10. Now we have officers that were 10 or weren't even here. And they're going into a high energy situation that they've never experienced before either, and they're scared. So now we have 30-year-olds that have never experienced this that are growing. We have officers that have never experienced that are coming in and doing raids. And I want to ask you, and I want to ask Estelle, if we could create, I know we have liaisons in many other ways. As a human rights commissioner, we get to come to LICA meetings and listen and participate and have a voice. I think it's really time to have this cannabis legacy, not just through the Trellis program, but to have a voice so you can also hear and through these decisions have better information on how your actions impact us as a community. Thank you.
Thanks, Lanya.
My name's Steve O'Mallard. I and a number of other people for years worked on the idea of self-limiting ourselves in the cannabis industry so that we would all be small, tiny, below the environmental crisis stage. We worked with no success at all. Therefore, I'm not blaming you or anyone else in this beautiful county. It simply wasn't an idea that was acceptable to large numbers of growers. It's, I think, a big shame. We could have avoided so much trouble if we self-limited ourselves 5 years ago. It's not what I'm asking about now. I have a technical question. I understand that the county's putting out something over $250,000 a year on technological fixes, satellite imagery. Is this true?
It's less than $250,000, but it's $200,000, yes.
Seems like a lot of money to me. I get Google Earth free. I can see my own plants from the last time they photographed them. I haven't heard anybody mention any technical fixes for this ridiculous helicopter boondoggle we're talking about. I haven't heard any serious discussion at all. I'm sorry, Sheriff. I know that you indicated that it was, and I understand your fixed wing airplane discussion because everybody knows you only have a 45-degree angle roughly to work with and you're going by 100 miles an hour. That makes perfect sense, but satellite imagery for $200,000, what are we getting for it? I've seen no connection whatsoever with your need for a warrant. If that imagery is being revised, how often? I'd like to know that question. And I'd like to have an explanation where the $200,000 is going for. Everyone assumed, I assume, that the imagery was going to make this all completely unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the code enforcement unit is and the planning department is the recipient of the images. They are taken 5 times a year. So we have images that are taken throughout the year, and in all honesty, they're intended not only to be used for code enforcement, but for permitting, for building inspections, and for many different things within the planning and building department, because it gives us real-time data, at least recent data. So if there are things that we can see and we don't need to go out and visit the site, then we could save the trip. And there's real cost savings there.
5 times a year?
Correct.
Do you choose the dates?
No.
For $200,000, you can't get a better deal than that?
So if you have done any research,
I have not.
You would understand that this is a really, really good deal, that they are actually working with the county to provide this at a highly discounted rate, with the hope that this can be something that then they could market to other jurisdictions. So we don't expect this rate to continue in perpetuity. We do expect this rate to go up, and we may be in a position where we decide not to do that.
I don't see where it's very useful for the problems the sheriff is up against on a daily basis.
Yeah, I wish that we could use satellite imagery, and I could use asset forfeiture money to buy my own satellite. Sure, that would be great. But in reality, just like we said before, we can't do that. We have to have eyes on, and helicopters are part of that reality. If we can use something different, if we can use drones, you know.
No.
Okay, Bonnie says no. But again, being in a rural area, I know that people live in the country because they love the peace and quiet. But the alternative to living in a rural area for search and rescue, for, let's say, fire operations, for medevac helicopters. Helicopters are a reality when living in a rural area. And so when it's an emergency situation, we're going to have helicopters. We're going to have helicopters fly over. We're going to have that. And it's going to be probably PTSD. To make it even worse is, you know, CAL FIRE's getting rid of their Hueys. They're going to have Black Hawk helicopters. Okay? And they're going to fly day and night. And that is because the Blackhawks have technology, and they're going to have ways of using, you know, the night vision to do night operations, and that is a good thing for us because they can fight fires at night and when the wind dies down. And so I know that people want to limit, but I do want to mention too that helicopters do offer a lot of great things for our community. And, you know, so we will look at, like I told Bonnie, I said, I can't take that PTSD away and what happened in the past, but what I can do is I can be open for change. I can be open to looking at better ways of doing something. If I can do that, I will. But again, it's not going to prevent helicopters from being flown in southern Humboldt. And I know PG&E, you know, I know they send out advertisements, but they fly the lines all the time. And they say, you know, hey, we're going to fly on this day, and just so you know, and there's smaller helicopters, I get it, but
And they're just flying over the lines, they're not over circling people's homes.
Gotcha.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, yes, I got you. So that is disturbing. I do hear you, and I'll be asking, you know, the reasons why certain circling does happen, and see what the response is.
Thank you. A little short. Kristen Nevedal. I have a couple of questions. I think I heard earlier that the abatement process used last year with the $10,000 fines and the letters that went out was pretty successful. And I'm wondering if, in a moment, John Ford, if you would be so kind as to speak to the successes and the challenges with that program, because I'm also aware that until very recently, the licensing authorities did not have the ability to actually support local municipalities with eradicating or managing illegal or non-compliant operations. But with the governor's trailer bill this year, we saw each of the state licensing authorities have the ability to assess fines of up to $30,000 per violation per day, and also issue abatement. So I guess some of what I was a little surprised about was that we didn't try going back to abatement. I mean, maybe you did, and I'm hoping you'll speak to it, but it seemed to me like instead of trying to go back to abatement letters and the threat of fines, even in conjunction potentially with CDFA to increase those fines, we started with helicopters, and it did feel heavy-handed. I mean, I didn't come here until the 90s, but even at that, it was a long enough time to really dislike that activity. Even working in town, I was feeling a little anxious and alarmed, even though I'm in Garberville downtown. And with the communications that have been so excellent between the state and the county, isn't there a way that we can start with a letter and abatement first? And then I don't know, I know that there's some issues with warrants. Like, if someone refuses to prove that the abatement has happened, is that grounds for then a warrant so that you don't necessarily have to do the aerial surveillance? So a landowner ignores the abatement notice, right? Is that grounds then for allowing the sheriff to come in and manage it? So I would appreciate a little conversation around that, please.
Sure, thanks, Kristen. So we have not stopped the abatement process by any means. We continue to post notices to abate and notice of violation. As I mentioned earlier, we're not doing it with the same volume that we have in the past, because we are using some of our resources to focus on what we perceive to be larger violators within the permit system that up until this point have been protected because they're in the system. We continue to send out notices to abate, notice of violation. I think 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, it hit the press, particularly here in southern Humboldt, when we posted 30 in 1 week. I do want to point out that 10 of those were notices of the intention to apply a lien, because those 10 had previously not responded to the first notice that they received. And so now we're at a point where we're continuing to issue the notices to abate, the notices of violation. But we've also got in the neighborhood of the 840 notices to abate, notice of violation that we've issued today. I think there's 238 that have just not responded. And so these are the folks that we're also beginning to give a priority to in not only issuing them a notice saying that you're now in danger of having a lien imposed on your property, and that requires board and supervisor approval. But we also impose an additional notice to abate and notice of violation, which starts the clock all over again on the fines and violations. So we are very active in that. There are times when we coordinate with the sheriff about circumstances that we think may be of interest to the sheriff, and the sheriff's office evaluates those to determine whether or not those are things that they're going to address or not. So I would not want anybody to think that the helicopter is the county's only approach to addressing the illicit cannabis cultivation that's going on. We're still very much engaged from a code enforcement standpoint, and we'll continue to do that. As I mentioned, though, we are finding that if we continued with the path that we were on, hitting 30 or more a week, we would very much be then hitting smaller cultivators. And that's not really where we want to be placing our emphasis right now. And so we are reapplying those resources to look at the larger, more egregious violators that are really in the permit process right now, and that need to, they need some additional attention.
Whether or not an abatement notice goes unanswered or unresponded to, it can be grounds for a search warrant. I would love to hear.
Just the abatement notice will not be grounds for a search warrant. We have to, again, generate our own criminal complaint and our own probable cause to justify to a Superior Court judge that a search warrant is warranted.
Thank you. The abatements are posted, they're sent via mail, and they're also posted in the paper. And the reason we do that is, you know, hopefully between one of those three, and we find that it's successful, between one of those three, people do get notified.
Okay.
Hi. Excuse me. My name is Ted Kogan. Well, I've had time with all three of you privately over the last number of weeks, so I promise to take no longer than 60 seconds of your time now. One thought that occurred as I'm listening to this, rules, laws, regulations, there's not much room for equivocation, we understand that. But the black and white nature, which I'm hearing, you're either in the process or you're not. I would just offer that there is a gray area here. Prior to 2016, I think it was quite clear that it was black and white. If you grow pot, you're illegal. If you don't, no worries. Today, and I think Director Ford could testify to this, the state rules are changing all the time. I don't know how you possibly keep up with that, and I can tell you that the people at your front desk, however well-meaning, however intelligent, and they all are, I've had conflicting information from 2 or 3 of them. What I would suggest is, the number of baby boomers in this room, there were plenty. We've been living under bad laws since Nixon's war on drugs, or if you want, 1970, or if you want to look at it, the Marijuana Tax Act, 1937. There doesn't feel like there's that much relief here, you know? They're still feeling like there's criminality as the cloud over everybody's head, even if you're trying to be compliant. I've tried to be compliant. In 2016, I leased my property to a young veteran with PTSD, not violent kind, he got his in peacetime, but he became an expert on CBD, and his medicine has been working wonders for people. He said if I allow him to use this lease, I didn't want any part of this. I foresaw what I thought was coming, a morass of rules, regulations, and contradictory information. But he went through it, and he said friends of his in San Diego, a licensed company, would then buy my property if there's a permit in place. That is what happened. I sold my property, the final escrow closed in October of 2018. The people who bought it were actually acting in bad faith, and I wanted to talk to Director Ford. I found out some more information about this. But they let the permit expire. They didn't come through with my balloon payment at the end of January, and now I'm getting suspicious. So come February, I get an excise tax bill in my name, even though I'm 4 months removed, 5 months removed from being the owner, 4 months. Then I get contacted by the water board, and I'm not the owner either, but I'm still trying to show good faith and keep the permit process going. So I invite them out. But I tell them, I'm not the legal owner, and here who is. So they contacted that person. We had the Fish and Game, both local and state, water board come out, and we took them throughout the whole property, and they thanked us for the nice tour, and they were very happy that my friend's cultivation was done with rain catchment water. But anyways, I foolishly went and paid that $10,000 bill because I was trying to keep the process alive, and I was suspicious of the buyer. Then I went to the tax collector in March and found out he hadn't paid the tax bill either. So I paid that also, trying to keep this thing all going. We've figured out why we're having the problem that we're having. But I will say this, and this speaks again to the gray area of everything. Lawyers of the various parties in this thing say there could be lawsuits going in 5 different directions. None coming at me happily, because I did the right thing. I mean, but now I'm in the process of foreclosing, and foreclosure, if one doesn't know, takes 3 months and 22 days. I'm now in the 22 days. But my property's in precarious situation. The young man who has been doing the CBD grow, he was burned by his alleged friends. And so I'm just saying it's complicated. I would hope that you enforce with diligence and a little bit of selection. I'm not saying who should get free and who shouldn't, but I think there's nobody in this room that agrees with egregious grows that we know about. Garbage, pesticides, pirated water. I know my young friend's situation isn't that at all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a letter here from, it's from Beginnings, which is in Bryceland. It says, "To whom it may concern, my name is Julia Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Beginnings in Southern Humboldt. We house a child care center, an elementary charter school, and a community center on our campus in Bryceland. I'm writing in regard to the very low flying helicopter in the Bryceland area recently. Our community is hyper alert to helicopters in the event of emergency and fire, etc. We had not heard of anything like that happening on the day of the flight, so we were quite concerned. This is of particular concern due to the fact that we have only one road in and out of Bryceland area and one road in and out of our school. In the event that we would have to, just lost my place, sorry, evacuate children, a heads up would be very beneficial to us. It was also very disruptive to our work environment in the office and at the preschool, which was in session at the time. Julia Anderson, Executive Director."
And that's been a problem in the past. I mean, if it's a fire, the helicopter brings up all this adrenaline. And they were just the preschool, but they're going to have all the students there. Having a helicopter roaring up and down, it's very disruptive.
I'm Daryl Cherney, as you probably know. There's a concept that's just been rattling through my head on so many levels, on so many different issues about our lives here in Humboldt County. And that concept is that we are no longer free. We have lost our freedom. We are not free to walk down the streets of Garberville without the fear of being robbed. We're not free to live in our homes without the fear of being invaded. We are not free to send our children to South Fork High School without the fear of them receiving a massively inferior education. We are not free to drive down our roads without having to pay $125 for the flat tire that we get as we travel down the myriad of places or pulling over to the shoulder to let people pass. We're not free to do that either. There is a loss of freedom here. A friend of mine said, and I agree, that this government here is turning all the hippies into libertarians. But I see this, and another friend of mine, a big libertarian, said, you know, all these regulations, they've been imposed on us by the Democrats. I am a Green Party member, by the way, so I don't take responsibility for either party. But what I'm saying is I believe that both parties are definitely hell-bent on taking away our freedom. And what I see here is the proof is in the pudding. We're not free to build up a little shack. We're not free to poop in a hole. We're not free to drink our own water out of our own creek. We are not free. Maybe we never have been, but it's become clearer than ever. Shelter Cove, where I am a registered voter, there is no law enforcement there at all. I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'll tell you this, when the problems out there occur, we locals have to take care of it ourselves because there is no law enforcement at all. Zero, zippo, nada. So, what I'm seeing is, especially from the Supreme Court, is massive violations of the 8th Amendment. And the recent Supreme Court ruling started to talk very seriously about local, state, and local level government for profit. And that's what I'm seeing here, the government not representing us, but rather the government preying upon us, the government seeing us as a way to extract money from us. And one thing I see about these fines from an environmental point of view, as you all know, I still call myself an earth firster. And I see as a no compromise. I see from an environmental point of view, these fines are not encouraging people to clean up their messes. These fines are encouraging people to leave their messes behind and walk away. And I don't even know what happens to the properties after that. There's probably too many of them to count. I know the real estate people here will tell us that there's hundreds of properties on the market. We're no longer free to sell our land if we want to get the heck out of here. Because you can't even sell it. There's no market anymore because of all the craziness that's going on here. There's violations of the 8th Amendment, which protects us from unreasonable fines. It's not just about cruel and unusual punishment, it's about unreasonable fines as well. $10,000 a day, $30,000 a day. I've read in Red-Headed Black Belt, $500,000 a day. Is that going to convince anybody to clean up their mess? That is a clear violation of the 8th Amendment, and I see that lawsuit coming down the pike. But what I really see is these fines not here to encourage us, or the enforcement activities here to encourage us to make things better. Oh, you want to put a little trailer or a little shack on your land to provide what the county general plan might call affordable housing? That is a mandate of this county to provide affordable housing. We are not free to do that either. And now we see the military is here. Now, last I checked, the military was not allowed to engage in local law enforcement, in domestic law enforcement activities. But they are. They are for sure. And there's another nick. A nick, that's a bludgeon to our freedom in this country, if we ever were free. And then, what about the priority of the money? And this is a really strong thing I see. While people are being robbed in their homes in Redway and Garberville, while Stephanie Galboy's murder is still unsolved in Redway, without my calls of different leads to that crime being investigated, while that happens, I see this other money being spent. And not only the big egregious grows, which y'all allowed happen for about 7 years before you decided you didn't want to let it happen anymore, which we were all pissed off that happened to begin with from 2010 to 2017. But now, that money needs to be spent on stopping the crime, on fixing our roads, and bettering our education, and not in calling in the National Guard. So, what I ask of you is this. I have a question here. Number one, I'll direct this toward Estelle, and I'll give both questions first so that you can answer it collectively. What about reducing some of those fines? Because I know the Board of Supervisors unanimously agreed to raise the fines from $10,000 per violation total to $10,000 a day with a $900,000 total. That's like a 9,000% increase in fines. I don't see that as making the situation better, even though I agree that some of those egregious grows have to go. We agree on that. So I want to see what the county supervisors are going to do about reducing those fines and also reprioritizing our money that we're now spending on this craziness to get it so we can get to our homes safely and then live in our homes safely and leave our homes safely. So that's my question is, what are we going to do? Do you see reducing the fines to a manageable amount that incentivizes people to do that? And then secondly, I would like to see Humboldt become a sanctuary county of a different nature. I know that there is now that, I believe it was Measure K said that law enforcement can no longer go after undocumented immigrants. I'd like to see us become a sanctuary county from the state. That you no longer call the state to help do your dirty work. If you need to do it here, do it locally, get it done. But let's not get these people with $500,000 fines coming in per day to do it. So I'd like to see us become a sanctuary county for the state of California. So what are we going to do about reprioritizing our budget to help our roads, our education, the crime, And you did, it was law enforcement, it was Sheriff Russell, it was your office who calls the National Guard. Is that your responsibility as opposed to the supervisors? I'm just asking.
Yes.
Okay, so that's my question. What about reprioritizing law enforcement to deal with the meth guys? I watched one of your deputies, very professionally, walk into McClellan Insurance where some meth argument has spilled into the office, the storefront, and I was actually in there at the time, you know, paying my auto insurance. And then when the whole thing was done, there was the deputy, and there was a little 10-year-old boy who went back to running the drugs for his dealer, and there was the dealer in front of the Shell station, right in front of the deputy. When are we going to have some stakeouts to get that handled? Because that stuff, we all know, is the nastiest of nasties. So when is the priority going to go to help us live free here in Humboldt County as the free Americans that we all desire to be?
Thanks, Daryl. Very passionate, and I appreciate the comments there. It is something I think we're all dealing with in Humboldt County. You brought up a lot of great points. As far as priorities, and life is always the priority over property crimes, over marijuana, and those things are very, very important to us. And so if our deputies are ignoring something, then that's something I need to deal with. A training issue, a supervision issue, those are things I need to deal with. Several years ago, it was under Mike Downey, and then we carried on. Our drug task force used to be essentially a marijuana task force, and it ignored heroin and methamphetamine for years. That is no longer the case. Our drug task force is focused, hyper-focused, on methamphetamine and heroin, to the point that we've seized more meth and heroin in the last 3 years.
I wanted to make sure something.
And so it is something that is an epidemic here, even though it's essentially been almost decriminalized now in the state of California. Personal use is a misdemeanor. You know, there's not a lot of teeth when it comes to prosecution, but we're still moving forward with that. We see the big dealers and the transporters as people that are pushing poison on our society. And so we are focused on that. So that is something, Daryl, that I want this community to know, that we are looking and that we are acting on that. Our marijuana enforcement team does have 4 personnel assigned to it. And because of the amount of issues we have with illegal cannabis here in our county, and I have to focus on that as well, because half of our violent crimes associated, half of our homicides last year were marijuana related. And because of what you're talking about, robberies, because of drug deals gone bad, because of debts not paid, you know, people get killed over this. And so that's something that I am continuously going to be dealing with until the violence is taken away from it. And so it's something that we want to focus on and work at and work with this community. We want to build trust in the community, and whether it is through just enforcement action or just repeated meetings, one-on-ones with people, we want to make sure that you all feel comfortable knowing where we're coming from. Because I know people said, hey, there's a whole lot of gray now. There was a whole lot of gray then. I think it's pretty black and white now. And so we know who the people are that are doing the violations. And so it makes our job a lot easier now than it was under 215. And so that's what makes it a little easier to move forward and to go and make sure that that people do have a clear avenue for compliance, a clear avenue to get compliance with state law, and then there's people that want to choose the illicit market, and then they are in my sight and code enforcement.
So if I could I wanted to make sure some things were clear about the kind of the evolution of code enforcement and the fines. The main thing that I want to get across, and I'll probably say this at least 3 times so that I make sure to communicate this, is that it's not about the money. The fines are really about helping people understand the significance of the response. So one of the things that the Board of Supervisors began, this is from a staff perspective, I'll let Supervisor Fennell speak to her perception of it, but began the cannabis permitting process with the idea of being encouraging, offering incentives to come into compliance. And so the original ordinance was very much written that way. The 2.0, Mr. called, is also written that way. The struggle that we soon found is that there were a lot of people who had come into the community that were not necessarily interested in maintaining the same ethos that the longtime membership of this community had relative to living small, quiet lives, do no harm kind of thing. They came in, graded hillsides, took down large amounts of trees, created huge environmental crimes. And so the struggle was how to respond to that. And one of the things that became very clear is that the existing ordinance that guided code enforcement was not adequate to deal with the circumstances. It was not adequate because the penalties were little more than the cost of doing business, and it was not adequate because the process could drag out for 6 months, 18 months, a prolonged period of time, which didn't lead to anything. And so the ordinance was modified to do two primary things. One is to create a process by which the county could take control of a property in situations where the violation was truly significant. That's the purpose of the notice to abate. If somebody doesn't respond to that within the 10-day period, then the county can take action to abate the nuisance. We have never done that after 10 days. I want to make that clear. That's not our objective either. We far more prefer to work with the property owner and have them abate the violation and be able to move on. Secondarily is then the fines couldn't be just the cost of doing business. They had to be something that indicated that there was some significance. And so there was a fine structure that was built up that has 4 categories. And the 4th category is between $6,000 and $10,000 a day. And the ordinance does identify that a cannabis violation is a mandatory category 4. And so then the discretion of whether or not it should be $6,000 or $10,000 is based on the circumstances associated with it. And that is something we've changed this year in terms of sending out the notices to abate, as we do more specifically identify what the violations are and what the intended or the needed action is to respond to it. If people respond within 10 days and come in, and Dottie, you mentioned coming and talking to Warren Black, and most people when they meet Warren love Warren because he loves to work with people. And our objective is not to see how long we can drag it out, but see if we can get it resolved and see if we can get a path to resolution. Nearly 50% of the violations that, I don't want to exaggerate, I'll say nearly 40% of the violations that we have get resolved without fines and penalties. Because people remove the infrastructure, they remove the cannabis, they clean up the site, or they agree to do it in a short period of time. If they can't do it because the violation is so egregious, we do offer something called a compliance agreement that gives them some time to redo the grading and revegetate the site, depending on what needs to be done, if it can't be done within 10 days. And so the great thing about even the compliance agreement is that it stops the fines from accruing. Again, we don't want, our goal isn't to see how big of a fine we can impose on people. Our goal is to make sure that the sites get cleaned up, that the activity that's in question, that's a violation, stops, and that anything that's been done in order to facilitate that activity gets corrected. So I just want to be clear that the fines and penalties, while people talk about $10,000 a day per violation, they talk about $900,000. All of that is an unfortunate reality. The other side of that is the ability to come into compliance and not be in violation, and to stop all of that. And I would just also say that having to do code enforcement is an unfortunate reality. Because frankly, if people weren't doing things that were against the law, we wouldn't have to do this. And one of the things as a regulator that I have to deal with and struggle with in my own mind is that my sole purpose really comes down to the fact that people throughout time have violated each other. That's how zoning began, is because people started using their rights, their freedoms, to adversely affect other people. And so all of the laws that we deal with on the local level really come down to trying to protect our neighbors from ourselves. If we would all not do the things that harm our neighbors, we wouldn't have to do that, right? And so I agree with your idea of freedom, but part of the struggle is that sometimes it is, unfortunately, the role of the government to help us live in such a way that we can be a strong and stable community, and to draw boundaries in terms of what's appropriate. And so that's really our goal. Our goal is not about the fines and penalties.
Just one clarification. It's the Board of Supervisors that decided any marijuana violation was a Category 4. Category 4 talks about doing harm. So there's 3 other categories, and the board went for the Category 4, which a lot of places aren't doing that harm.
So the ordinance does identify cannabis, marijuana as a Category 4. That's absolutely true. And just in context, recall that when that was written, the thing that the county was deeply struggling with were all the large egregious grows that had come in, and we were getting lots of complaints daily, and it was almost like the county was unable to deal with it. And so that really is in context, was the target to be able to deal with those.
Yes, and so for those, the Category 4 would be appropriate. For other abatements, it very possibly, I don't think, is appropriate. But that's the supervisors, so if people are concerned about it.
So that's certainly a takeaway from this discussion.
Okay.
Daryl actually asked me. First of all, I think that John really explained it very, very well. Remember that after 1996, we had what's known as the Green Rush. And no offense to people who were here less time than I am, okay? But there were people who came in here who I believe destroyed our beautiful environment for greed. And those are the kind of people who would factor in a small fine as the cost of doing business. You see that across the world in every business, whether it's putting up a high-rise building in San Francisco or whatever. It's the cost of doing business. It's a very common practice. And those are the kind of people we were dealing with. Now, I personally have helped, as John will know, quite a number of small people who got abatement notices, and I have witnessed the planning department being very understanding. If somebody had to do something that took longer than 10 days, the reasons for that were taken into consideration. But the bottom line was you got 10 days to respond and 10 days to start working with the planning department. Making the fine less is not going to make that more probable. And so the bottom line was just engage with the planning department. I think if John is right and more of the egregious situations are taken care of, I think you're going to see a different look. But I will say that, and John can correct me on this, but these fines of $10,000 a day are almost always for those large people. That's just, I haven't seen a small one, maybe there is, and correct me if I'm wrong. I do think that you have to remember also that the Board of Supervisors is 5 for a reason. I'm just one. I hear you loud and clear. I also want to be aware that you're aware that the compliance part of the agreement is kind of like working with the planning department. So I really, really encourage people, and I would encourage anyone who gets any kind of notice like that to give me a call, because it can be worked out, even if it's a case of, say for instance, I've known of a couple. Well, I'll just tell you, the very first day I heard of abatements going out, somebody called me up and said, we knew, and most people did know, that come January 1st of this year, unless you were in the process, you were not supposed to be growing. So we didn't grow. So what I did when I saw this notice is I went out and I took a picture of myself with today's paper and a notice, and that was enough. But it was obviously disturbing. It was like, hey, we know. So, yeah, there can be some issues with that, but I think that the planning department has worked it out a little bit more. Again, we really strongly want to send a strong message to the people who have been destroying our environment, who have been mowing down hillsides, sucking the water out of the creeks, etc., etc. So I just want to say that that is very important, and hopefully it is more and more successful, and maybe we can look at things a different way. But I do remember when it first started, it was actually out in the Shelter Cove area, and there had been a Q zone put in place, and there were a number of people who were from Florida, Texas, who came out there, and they got the old fine, and they just waited it out till harvest time. And so that was part of the reason why the board went a lot more strict. And when I say a little bit, I'm just thinking about some of the cases that I've seen come out where Fish and Wildlife, water quality are going to give you $80,000 a day fines. So it's all relative, but again, it is definitely aimed at those large growers and most egregious. And I understand. And as far as you're resonating about being free, I'll echo also what Director Ford said. There's nothing any of us would like more than to be completely free. But we all know that I remember people complaining about the logging community and wanting to have restrictions on them because of their practices. I'm sure they would have loved to be free of all those regulations, but those regulations have actually improved the environment in this community and in this county. So this is part of being in the regulated process. And I also want to talk about the fact that it's illegal still. It is still a Schedule I drug, and on the federal level. And your only protection is to be under the protection of the state. And the state of California now says it's legal to grow marijuana. And I'm telling you, if you go through the county process in Humboldt County, you're much more likely to get a state license than practically any of the other ones around. I will give you a little bit of news. You may be aware, but Kamala Harris, who's running for president, has actually put forward a bill that would reschedule cannabis. I don't know how far it will go, but that will tell you the trajectory of cannabis in our world. From way back 40, 50 years ago when people moved here and just wanted to grow a few plants and then discovered that they could actually make money doing it, to now, where we're talking about the federal government. So, changing times for sure.
is. There is a chasm between $10,000 total and $900,000 total. That's a pretty big chasm. So I feel like the increase in fine could have been substantial, but not to that exponential degree that makes it almost seem ludicrous. But that said, I appreciate your answers. I really want to see law enforcement on the local crime here. I want to see the county money on our education and our roads and the things that really help us on a day-to-day level. And that is my request of all of you.
Okay, one other thing, I'm sorry to butt in here, Jarrell, but I just want to remind you that 67 cents out of every tax dollar goes to the schools. It does not come to the county. So we send it out to Sacramento, and 67% goes to the schools. So if you do the math, we get much less of that actually for all other county services.
Thank you.
Was there anybody else?
I want to thank you all for being here as well. I just wanted to tag on to what Daryl was saying. Actually, I'm unfortunately one of the people that got an abatement order that had no cannabis on their property. And I know a handful of people that have had the same. I went in, talked to Warren Black the moment we got it on our gate, and blah, blah, blah. It's for illegal grading, threat of $10,000 a day. I'm a professional, I work at schools. It was an absolute nightmare. I go in, talk to Warren Black. I said, what if I can't hire an engineer or a forester within 10 days? He's like, fines begin. Absolutely no caring whatsoever. I'm $51,000 into this nightmare. We went out with the newspaper, like you said, Estelle, and showed we have no cannabis, we have no cannabis. It didn't matter. The grading fund, it was horrible. They say you need a grading permit. I go in to get a grading permit. It doesn't exist. What do you mean it doesn't exist? How much is a grading permit? $1,500. Where's the application? Okay. Because my husband did grade the road. He did grade the road, maintained our road. Okay. I thought you were allowed to maintain your own road, but I guess you're not allowed to maintain your own road. Come to find out, I have to hire an engineer. $11,000 in to create a proposal for the grading permit. None of that has been communicated. Honestly, and then I get a letter in the mail from Texas for somebody wanting to buy my property for $51,000, the exact amount of the abatement. Seems kind of suspicious to me, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm kind of wondering, is this a land grab? How many people that have gotten abatement orders are getting offers on their property to basically walk away from what they put their entire life into, and for pennies on the dollar, just to get out of the abatement?
So
True
could I
story.
just,
How many people in here know people that have gotten abatement orders that had no cannabis on their property? I asked Warren Black, because I should back up. We applied for the amnesty program because we did build a cabin without getting permits. In good faith, because we kept hearing it on KMED. We just want to work with you. We just want to bring you into compliance. You know, you can, and my husband built it to code because it's not his first house. We knew what we were doing. We had the plans and everything. Thought, okay, instead of getting an inspector on our property, we get an abatement notice before we ever get a call back for somebody to come and do a site visit.
I will tell you, those are completely unrelated.
That's what Warren Black said. But it sure feels related to me because I got an abatement notice before I got a call from the inspector.
I can appreciate that. And let me say that I hear
Am I
what
going
you're
to get my
saying.
money back? Hello? I mean, I had no cannabis on my property.
No, I understand that. Can we meet after the meeting? I'd love to get your particulars and I will look into
He
it.
didn't even respond when we sent the photos. I emailed him, what,
So you
25
sent
photos?
photos?
Oh, that day. We went out April 4th with the newspaper in the rain. Hello? I mean, because it was day 5 by the time I got my letter in the certified mail. And I'm freaking out. Hello, I take a day off work. I'm scrambling, thinking I'm not going to lose my father's property,
Right,
you know?
right.
I mean, this is horrible.
So what was the grading that was identified out of curiosity?
What was the grading, Phil? Oh yeah, did I mention our property had been logged 45 years ago, and I had communicated that when my dad bought the property really cheap, it had been logged. And I said, hey, these roads were already here, doesn't matter.
Yeah, no,
Doesn't matter.
I'm sorry you went through that. Those are I hope you will accept that we're all human, and oftentimes we make less than perfect decisions.
I can accept that.
We are learning,
But $51,000 is a lot of money that a lot of people don't have.
Well, and frankly, for something where it can be demonstrated that you didn't have cannabis, we don't want a fine. And frankly, if we can look and see through aerial photography, and we can, that was a landing and that it predated your presence on the property, where you don't even need to get it, you don't need to do anything. We'll just take care of it.
Yeah, let's talk after the meeting, that'd be great.
Okay.
I have one more quick clarifying thing. I don't know if it was on the radio or a blog or something, but I think Billy said something about that the majority of the complaints were coming from legal growers, and that didn't go over too well with the legal growers. I'm wondering what percent of the complaints come from the licensed growers, how much from anonymous growers, how much from code enforcement or state, I guess the state regional water boards and Fish and Wildlife do their own thing.
Yeah, each of our regulatory agencies have our own tip lines, but we do have tip lines that people can leave an anonymous tip. Others do tell us that they're a licensed grower and that the person across the valley is growing without a permit, and they're tripled their greenhouses and lighting up the night sky. What the percentages of those are, I don't know. We can find that out, but I don't think I said the majority of the tips. We are receiving tips, absolutely. And I think the people that are licensed are getting frustrated, and I've heard that. Yeah, and I'm sure that they're not going to the coffee shop and they're saying, hey, listen, I'm the guy that tipped you off. You know, I'm sure everyone's saying, I'm not that guy. Don't worry, I'm not that guy in the valley. But rest assured that people are tipping us off because they are frustrated, because they're going through everything we're talking about here today, all the regulation and all the steps to get compliant with the law, and spending lots of money and lots of time, and yet the person across the way, and we've heard them too, celebrating, I've seen them, and saying, hey, I'm never gonna be compliant. You guys are suckers. I'm gonna stay on the black market till I die, and you know, and people are saying that to the licensed growers' faces, and so people are getting frustrated. So we are getting those tips, and but they are not the majority, but we are getting those tips.
Okay.
I need to include this in my presentation, and no one put me up to this, but what you're seeing here is CLIMP. CLIMP is here, been here from the beginning of this process in 1983. It's here now. I was in the office the other day and I overheard that CLIMP has maybe 2 months worth of rent to keep its office open. And I wish there were more people here, but CLIMP deserves our support, and there's a jar here. They're selling products, t-shirts, etc. And whatever you can do. This is our community at its best. This is one of the best manifestations of our community at its best. Support it.
Thanks, guys. We're time to wrap up, so you can each say whatever you like.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, we didn't really touch a whole lot on the state agencies, but there are some issues that we are concerned about with the state agencies, and we are actually in communication with them, also with Senator McGuire's office, to see if we can iron out some of the situations we see in terms of local jurisdiction, who's the lead. After all, we were one of a member of 6 counties who talked about local control, so we're following up on that. I also just want to say, you know, the incident that kind of started off this whole meeting was the use of National Guard helicopters, and as I think several people here said, I was under the impression that the National Guard was just going to be used on federal and state lands and on trespass grows, and now we're looking at a different situation. So I really do thank Doug for mentioning the role that CLEB is playing and keeping everything transparent, keeping the conversation going, and I hope we all learned a lot out of this today. I want to also talk a little bit about the small farmers, because Humboldt County really is trying to, in this new world, support the cannabis industry, both in marketing and et cetera, and with creating other categories such as cottage industry. And please avail yourselves of the local office now. You can just go in and talk and find out what are the rules, what are the potentials for somebody who wants to be involved. I think Humboldt County, we've heard for so long that Humboldt County ignored Southern Humboldt. Now I'm hearing some of my colleagues from up north saying, why are we giving Southern Humboldt so much? But anyway, I think that's a good turnaround. The other thing I want to say very briefly is we have a Project Trellis. People have probably heard about that. There are issues with roads, there are issues with people for whom it's very expensive to come into compliance. And so there is going to be a grant and microloan program as part of Trellis that is funded by the excise tax. And my appointment to that advisory committee is Tom Mulder. He has been coming to the Board of Supervisors a lot. He really empathizes and supports the small growers, and that is a main reason why I picked Tom, and I hope you'll work with him. And then the other person from down here that I think is going to be a wonderful addition to the advisory committee is Brian Sinclair, who is a little bit later arrival, but he really gets it in terms of the kind of grants and loans that they can give out. He said he's not for giving grants and loans to people who just want it. He wants to give it to people who need it. And that really resonated with me. So we'll have those two guys and a lot of other good people actually on that Cannabis Advisory Committee as part of Project Trellis. So I really invite people to become aware of that. Now they're just setting up, so we'll be hearing a lot more. And finally, I just really want to thank everybody for being here today, and I want to thank the Sheriff and Director Ford. We all have a hard time of this. The pain is distributed very widely. This is a sunny Sunday in summer, and here we are. And I am very glad to be here, and I appreciate everybody else who's here. And let's work together on this.
I'd just like to briefly say thank you for allowing me to be here today and to hear from you. I work in an office and often get directed on things and don't get to see everything that's going on. And so it's beneficial for me to hear from you and to know what your experience is and what you're experiencing. So I thank you for that. Thank you for hearing from me when I've tried to answer questions. Hopefully I've been able to give information that clarifies and helps you make good decisions. I think in the end, I would like to leave you just with one thought. The Planning and Building Department does want to see the community succeed, because there is no success without all of us succeeding together. And so we may not always get it right, but we will continue to work at it to improve what we're doing and to get better. And that's the commitment I'll make to you, is I want to be here for you, and I want to see us all succeed together. Thank you.
Just want to thank Bonnie, K-Mud, and CLMP for having this. This is very, very important that we get together, we talk about issues like this. And I'll leave my business cards up here if anyone wants to follow up with an email or phone conversation after this meeting. I'd be more than happy to talk with you regarding your concerns. I will be looking into those things I talked about as far as the helicopter is concerned, and looking at alternatives if necessary. But I appreciate everyone's input, openness, and again, I have an open door policy, and Dottie has called me several times. Bonnie has too, and so it's if you have concerns, please call. And I have a big organization just like John, and oftentimes some things don't get covered that they should be covered, and so we want to make sure the right message goes out from the very, very basic source. And if that's not happening, then we need to hear about it and we'll fix it. So I appreciate everyone, and we can invest in some air conditioning next time. It is hot up here. Yes, thank you.
And I want to thank you all for coming here and for all the people that participated. Thanks.